Welcome to Safe on Deck. Episode 23 is part 2 of my interview with Royal Air Force Squadron Leader Bruce Macdonald. Bruce joined the Air Force in 1980 on an RAF Cadetship to study Aeronautical Engineering. And after training in the Bulldog, the Jet Provost, and the Hawk, he was selected to fly the Tornado GR1 variable sweep-wing multi-role combat aircraft. Bruce flew his first ever combat sortie on Night 1 of Operation Desert Storm, attacking Tallil Airfield in southern Iraq at 100 feet and 600 knots to employ the JP-233 low-altitude airfield denial system. Following completion of his first operational posting to Germany, Bruce returned to the UK to fly the Hawk, instructing student pilots on low-level navigation, ground attack, fighter maneuver, and weapons delivery sorties. Next, Bruce returned to the Tornado, where he served as an instructor pilot on the GR1 Weapons Conversion Unit, before being recruited to train as a test pilot. Following graduation from the Empire Test Pilot School, Bruce conducted a multitude of systems research and developmental flight test projects on the Tornado GR1 and the Jaguar GR3, all while continuing to fly the Hawk and the Tucano. Bruce was then selected for a highly coveted exchange tour with the U.S. Air Force on the 40th Flight Test Squadron at Eglin Air Force Base, where he flew the F-16 and the C-130 on weapons delivery and certification test sorties. Following a 20-plus year career in the Royal Air Force, Bruce transitioned to the airlines, where he flew the Boeing 717 and Boeing 737 for U.S. domestic air carriers for over 10 years. These days, Bruce is an Airbus experimental test pilot based in Mobile, Alabama, where he performs production and customer acceptance test flights on the A220 and the A320 airliners. Thus far, his career at Airbus has included flight test time in the A220, the A320, the A330, A340, A350, A380, the A400M Atlas, and the A330 Beluga-XL. Bruce is a prolific general aviation pilot who currently owns and operates a Vans RV4. Thanks for taking the time to listen. In the future, I plan to continue to share similar interviews with both current and retired military aviators. If you have a question or a suggestion for a future interview, please leave it as a comment below. Safe on Deck, Episode 23, Part 2, with Squadron Leader Bruce Macdonald. Enjoy. How long was that tour?
It was 3 years. I did 3 years on my first tour,
Okay.
a couple of months over, and then about another 3 and a bit on this one as
Okay.
well. And of course, about towards the end, I think, what am I going to do next? There were things, by now on my dream sheet, I had things like exchange tour with U.S. Air Force on F-16, and maybe going to fly the Jaguar, which was a single-seat airplane, see if I could do that, and things like the Red Arrows, which is our equivalent of the Blue Angels, But anyway, when my orders came around, it was back to the Tornado. So they had actually posted me back to Germany. This is now mid-90s, I suppose. But RAF Germany wasn't a patch on, the Cold War was over. We couldn't even do any low flying over there because the Germans had outlawed all that. You couldn't go below. All flying was 1,000 feet and above. And the country, if you've been to North Germany, it's flat as a pancake. So there's no, you might as well be at 10,000 feet, 1,000 feet. You're not contouring, So it didn't really appeal to me. So I kind of went back to the poster and said, "Can I get Lossiemouth, which is a base up in the north of Scotland, where there were a couple of Tornado squadrons there, and the operational conversion unit?" And he made some phone calls and said, "Yeah, the boss of the OCU will have you." And that's because I had when someone who's going to be a squadron commander, they're probably coming off a ground tour. That's typical what happened. When you get to that, 04, 05, 06 level, you're alternating your flying tours with time on the ground. So when you came off a ground tour, you would come to our little Hawk unit here, the TW, do a little short course, get you back in swoop. And this guy, I'd got along with this guy. Maybe instructed him on a couple of flights. So therefore, when he was asked, would I have him on his squadron? So, he said, so I didn't get to do another operational tour. I had to go back to the Tornado conversion unit. But if you look at it, it kind of made some sense because now I'm combining my instructional skills that I've learned on the Hawk plus my operational Tornado experience. So I went back to the Tornado. Up in the north of Scotland, wonderful place to live. Of course, that was me back in Scotland since I was 9 years old, way back up in the north. Climate was, I guess it must be more like the bases out in Alaska. There was no distractions. The weather was amazingly clear. The visibility, you were away from people, socialized within the base because there really wasn't anything else. The weather, typical day would really, visibility. You felt you could see. In fact, the expression was you could see the back of your own head because you could see such precision to the horizon. You felt you were seeing all the way around the world to the back of your own head. And the little white clouds would whistle across at about 50 miles an hour because it was windy. But the visibility was really good. Of course, occasionally you would get snow and stuff up there because it's far north. And you could play a round of golf starting after work. You could start at 7 p.m. and it didn't get dark till 11. So you could play a whole round of golf after work. In the summer.
Yeah, of course.
In the winter, it's dark at 3:30 in the afternoon. So we could only fly a 2-wave day, daytime, because it wasn't light till about 9:15 in the morning.
I'm guessing there's not a lot of night flying in that syllabus for those students either.
Well, no, because there was the terrain, all the terrain following radar.
Of course.
Yes, so there was night flight.
Okay.
But unfortunately, of course, it's quite mountainous around there, so quite a bumpy ride. If it went on a windy night. So what else?
As a pilot, are you training in the two?
Well, both the navigator and the pilot students are there.
Are there?
On a
Okay,
course.
that's what I was getting.
So
at.
you're you might take the pilot got one flight with an instructor pilot in the back, and then he would have like staff navigators in the back, and so you would know that if we did a 2-ship, it would have a student pilot with a staff nav, and now an instructor pilot, that's me, with a student nav. And the student nav would have to plan and brief the navigation aspects of it, and then the student pilot would brief the formation aspects, and you kind of supervising, and I would have to write, because he's in my cockpit, I'd be writing the student report on the navigator rather than on the pilot. And we're just teaching the basics. So we didn't teach air-to-air refueling, for example, on the OCU. The bombs we dropped were all the little practice bombs, not the big ones. But we're teaching basic tactics and how to fly the airplane and stuff like that. So, but I do remember it being such a good tour. I was only there for 2 years. I very quickly got qualified as a bounce pilot, which is like the bounce pilot is comes guys that intercepts the formation, right? And for about my entire second year, I don't think I ever wrote a student debrief, because I was always the bounce, or I was doing this, and did a lot of deployments. I was always the guy who said, "Oh, you need a couple of airplanes going to Denmark for an exercise? I'll do that," or some. So I do remember just doing lots and lots of bouncing, which basically is there's a skill to it. You're following it. You brief with the formation. And you're in the same kind of airplane, of course. It's not like you're dissimilar. And then you kind of launch before they do, and then you intercept them, and they're practicing their evasion tactics, the defensive tactics. And you want to have a variety for good training. You want to give them a variety, one head on, one stern, one from the side. You want to appear out of nowhere so that they can, they see you and react. And you have to have this mental plot of, because you disengage, go out of visual range. Now you know their route, and you try and have this inertial sense of where they're going to be, so you can pop up and bounce them again, and then you're basically fighting the airplane, maneuvering it at low altitude too, so you have to get it right.
When you define low altitude, what
well, we were teaching them 250 feet. We didn't tend to
you're doing this at 250 feet AGL.
Yes, the 100-foot stuff was only when you went to red flag for operational stuff. And
here I'm thinking like 1,000 feet. That is low for an intercepting another aircraft at that altitude, and they're defensive against you.
I would have for safety reasons, I would have to make sure I got some until I got visual with both of them. Deconflict. Yep. But as soon as I can see them down in the weeds and sneak up on them.
That is a level of flying that I don't think I can speak to, that it's totally gone. But I don't know that folks are out there just doing that. I don't know, but I don't think so.
A U.S. Air Force or Navy ever had that operating philosophy.
No, not at all.
But you had some cool airplanes, and you had a lot of assets, and we wanted to fight alongside you. Don't make any mistakes. But but we knew where our strengths were too.
Indeed.
Yeah.
2 years.
I did 2 years here. Yeah.
Okay. After that 2 years, where was your next posting?
I kind of got headhunted to go to test pilot school.
How does one get headhunted for test pilot school?
Here's a bit of a story since we've got time. I walked into the crew room one day And there's a pilot, a guy I hadn't seen for years. Hey, Trevor. This is a guy I knew from the Tornado back in Germany. He wasn't my squadron, but he was on my wing, so I knew him a little bit. I said, what are you doing here today? Oh, he says, I've had to come to an instrument check ride or something. I said, what are you doing? Oh, I'm at Boscombe Down, the test base now. I'm doing, did the test pilot course. I'm a test pilot now. And then I said, oh, he said, Bruce, you should do it. You'd be great for this. And he basically chatted to me about what they do down there. And I went, oh, that's great. Well, nice to see you, Trevor. Left. About 3 days later, as it happened, I was filling out the front page of my fitness report where you put your dream sheet, what you'd like to do next. And I thought, test pilot school I put down on there. But that's actually not, you actually required a separate application, but that was just a dream. About 2 months later, the phone rings, and this guy says, this is Wing Commander Laurie Hilditch. I am the commandant of ETPS here, and I'm looking for some good Tornado guys. We've been trawling all the personnel files, and have you ever thought of... So this is the boss of the test pilot school calling me up, asking me to apply.
I think you're going to get in.
Yeah. I guess they had some, the test pilot school needs people with particular backgrounds because they're anticipating test programs, that need people with that experience. So they have to look like 18 months ahead because the test pilot course is a year. And I guess they'd had some Tornado guys apply. He wasn't impressed with them. And he'd gone to the personnel center and said, do a data search of Tornado pilots with this experience in this rank, blah, blah, blah. And I had, my name popped up as one of half a dozen. So I still had to go down for the interview. Well, of course, I put the phone down with him. And of course, looking back at it, I was going, really, don't you have to be some sort of computer geek for that? And I was almost talking him out of it. And he said, no, we'll teach you everything you need to know, So I put the phone down. I thought, well, okay. So I went and did the application, which I'm sure nowadays is online, but in those days you went to the admin office and got the form out, the big regulation of forms, book of forms, and sent it off. And I went down to Boscombe Down, which is our test base there, and did the interview. And it was a board one of those board interviews where there's like 5 guys sitting behind a long table, and you're sitting on your own, and they're firing technical questions at you. And then there was an airborne element to the test. You got airborne in they had a variable stability, which is like a flying computer airplane. It was just a Hawk with a thing that you could reprogram different characteristics in, and they got you on the wing another Hawk and said, all right, and you would program. He said, okay, what do you think of it now? And you go, oh my God, it's all over the place. And he says, well, what's wrong with it? Well, it's too much lag and roll. Oh, okay. And then you program. So he just wanted to see if you had any aptitude for, how the airplanes flew, and you could detect a bad one from a good one. Yes, and you're right. It was a good omen that the boss had called me up, and so I did get selected for test pilot course. So I only did my 3-year tour at Lossy flying the Tornado was cut short. But
about a year of that time, I'm guessing, is actually going through test pilot school.
Right. So I went down to test pilot school. It's a year long, January to December. The British one is called Empire Test Pilot School. It's one of the big 4 with US Navy at Pax River, Edwards, and the French one called Epner. There's a lot of liaison between those 4 schools. Every year there is a US Navy student, a U.S. Air Force student, and a French Air Force student, and we send one there. On the staff, there's always an instructor. My main instructor was a U.S. Navy F-18 guy, so he took me through a lot of things. As a pilot, it's the most fascinating. If you're any sort of pilot who finds aviation fascinating, like you and I as a kid, wanted to fly. So I did meet some people in the airlines who were just doing it for the money, but it was really just right for me because it combined my, interest in flying and the experience that I had gained, with my intellectual curiosity about it, and the fact I was good at math and stuff. So all of a sudden, have you ever thought, this is what I was put on God's earth to do? Despite the fact I tried to tell you that I was a good Tornado pilot, I was an okay Tornado pilot, but this is actually what I was destined to do. It clicked, because you find out why is an airplane fly like it does, and why what's the good characteristics and what's the bad characteristics, and you learn that you and your airplane, your machine, are together trying to perform some task. And that you might say the task is the whole mission, particular line, or it might just be a small element. I'm trying to track the localizer on the glide slope on the way down. That's my task for the next 30 seconds. And the airplane has some characteristics and can communicate to you in a certain way, and you have certain abilities to absorb information and to react to them. So it's when those two don't line up very well that we end up with problems. You want an airplane that's very compatible with human reactions and vice versa. So that, and once the penny drops about that concept, you realize how you're. Of course, it does mean that you never do a bad landing again because it's always the airplane's fault. But that's you've got all the excuses in the world about but also when you were going through training and you were worried about getting washed out, you always thought. You must have had flights when you were getting trained when you struggled. It wasn't a great performance, and you thought, I need to try harder. It's me that's the problem, and you realise that we were designing airplanes not for the most exceptional pilots to fly, but for the average pilot to fly. And if I go out and if I go for a test flight and I fly an airplane with I find a difficulty with some task, and it might be control task. It might just be every time I press this button, I have to press it twice. I don't like the way it does that. If I have a problem with that, then I have to assume that the average pilot's going to have a problem with that. And so you don't have to be exceptional. You just have to be solid, but also aware of. So.
Who's your audience? Who are you trying to target this airplane for?
It's for the fleet pilot.
The fleet pilot, average fleet pilot.
And you notice how I've learned very quickly the U.S. Navy lingo.
Indeed you have.
We didn't talk about fleet pilots.
Nautical tradition. Yeah. I'm guessing it was probably a different term. Yeah.
But, So test pilot school itself started a month of ground school, pure classroom stuff, a lot of math and equations and stuff, at least at master's level, if not beyond. And then we went into most of the course. You go in the morning, you do a couple of hours of ground school, and then they have a couple of flying waves, and you step through all the elements. You do longitudinal stability, lateral directional stability, maneuver stability, performance and systems, and even cockpit layout kind of stuff, ergonomics of the cockpit, and flight control, what we call flight control mechanical characteristics, like how much breakout there is in the friction in the stick and all that kind of thing. You're working, the school has a number of airplanes right there, which are usually instrumented, so all the data is recorded or even transmitted live down to the control room, and they bring in guest airplanes throughout the year, so you can experience. I think I flew 20 A4 types in 1 year, not all as captain, but I don't
know if I've flown 20 that many types in my life. Yeah,
and then they even for the fixed wing guys. So our course had 10 fixed wing and 6 rotary guys, several of whom were actually training to be FTEs, flight test engineers, rather than pilots. So the ground school, and that's where in the tornado world, the rivalry between the pilots and the navs. Now in test pilots, it's between the fixed wing and the rotes. So you're always kind of mocking each other, but there's
it's a healthy back and forth. That's what
exactly.
Yes.
But we had some, and it's funny, quite a few guys in that class. They had been like at my basic flying school and stuff, and gone off and they were about the same point in their career, and we all met up. So I knew several of the guys I had been on training courses with or squadrons with, and we were meeting again. So you do all these various phases. You go up with your IP, and he perhaps demo some of the flight test techniques that you can do to test this, and then you can be given you go into little. ETPS uses the term syndicates, little student groups made up of a couple of student pilots and maybe a student, and then you say, right, your job. We're doing this is the longitudinal stability phase. This syndicate's getting the Jaguar as a test airplane. This syndicate's getting the Hawk. This one's getting the Tucano. This one's getting the whatever. And you have to come up with a test plan to and you can be given so many flights to get your data, write your report. The other thing that's stressed to you is you're never just testing a plane to say, is it a nice plane? It's always in relation to what mission, what role you're asking it to do. Role relation is the term they use all the time there. So, so of course that might be for fighter. Is it a good bomber? Is it for? And even when they brought in one time they brought in a DC-3, right, which was and the mission, of course, it was operated by this company that had the contract to lay detergent on oil slicks. So funny old thing, they said, go ahead and assess the DC-3 in the mission of, flying. So we had to think, well, what would be relevant maneuvers for it to do? Well, we have to fly like 100 feet, really stable, blah, blah, blah. So we came up with this test plan that basically involved flying down the runway at 100 feet in a DC-3. How accurately can I hold height and do all these things? So you always have to think, what is it that the Air Force or the Navy or the airline want to do with this airplane? And that's what we're going to evaluate it against. We're writing, at the end of the day, our report's going to say, is it suitable for this role or not? Or what improvements? Usually it's never quite so clear cut. It's got some deficiencies that you could do it, but you really would want to spend some money improving this part of it to make it So your previous experiences in the role is vital, because you got to know. So if I'm going to towards the end of the thing, there's a big final exercise, and I was given the F-16 to evaluate with another. It was just two of us. We do it. Another guy who's a RAF Harrier pilot. It was just two of us. We didn't have an FTE. This is the final graduating exercise. We lived and breathed this for like 7 or 8 weeks. We got told with about 2 weeks' notice, right, it's going to be the F-16. You guys are going to get Edwards to assess the F-16. So we had 2 weeks to come up with a plan. We got hold of a -1, a NATOPS thing, right? So we had a clue about the airplane, and we were still finishing a few other old reports. So there were some other things. So then we went out to Edwards with a plan, which had to be a test plan, and we started preparing all our test cards. It had to be approved by a instructor, of course, to say, is this safe, and even is it sensible? Are you going to hit the right points? We went out to Edwards Air Force Base. It was on the B model F-16, even though this was well into the day when the later models, because that's where all the deficiencies are. That's why they developed the C and the D models. And we evaluated. They gave us about 4 rides each. I think the deal we made with them, we had 10 hours of flying. Well, that turned out to be 8 flights, because they're like 1.2 something long, 1.3, and we got 4 each. And then, and actually, while we're there on down days, they gave us an F-15 ride and some other good stuff as well. We went out to Tehachapi and did the gliding thing out there, and flew the SR-71 simulator, because NASA had that at the time. So now we had 4 flights in F-16 each. So this is, and you're in the front seat. They gave us a B model with a IP as a safety pilot, but you're in the front with you haven't gone through FRS. You're learning to fly this because you read the -1, right? And you've got all these test pilots. But airplane F-16 is pretty intuitive. I mean, it's a great airplane, isn't it? So, we had all these test points to go up and do things we wanted to do. We persuaded them. I got the one flight when we went to the range and dropped bombs, and and dropping bombs and all these various PPI, CCIP modes and other radar modes, and doing radar updates and Tom got the flight when he went to the tanker, so he got to assess it there, and that's almost a story in itself. F-16 on the back of a tanker, very twitchy. For 2, and every night we're coming back and we're reviewing our test cards, saying what we got accomplished and whatnot. Because one of the things they drill you into is wasted time. You should always have way more test cards than you've got test time for. So if you've got spare time, then you can knock out a couple of extra things you wanted to do. So we're revising our plan at the end of every evening, reprinting our test cards, going out and then we flew back out of Los Angeles, and they gave us business class, which was great, because we started writing reports, and for 2 weeks Tom and I wrote this thing. I've got them at home. I've got a report about 2 or 3 inches thick about the F-16, and you had to hand that in like at 9 o'clock in the Monday morning, and then that Friday you had to give a little presentation. The presentation was dead easy, because you're now an expert. You've written the manual on it, and you just had to prepare a couple of slides, give a half-hour presentation, take some questions, and that's a graduating exercise. PAX has got the same thing. They have a different name for it. They call it DT2, and quite often we'd have U.S. Navy students come over to our base to fly some of our airplanes, because you try and pick something outlier. The year that I did it, so I did the F-16 at Edwards. A couple of guys did the F-14 down at Point Magoo. Now that's good, because there's no 2 stickers. So he was they gave him a lot of trust there.
You can't even start the airplane from the front seat.
Seat.
You have to have the back seater. Someone jump in the back, start the jet up, jump out.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
So he did the F4. We had one of our Australian guy on the course who was a P3 guy. He went to PAX and did the S3 Viking. One of our Herc pilot guy, he went to Toulouse and flew the A320. And the helicopter guys, they went out to South Africa and flew the Oryx, which is a South African development of the Puma, I think.
It is. Yep, it's their version of the 225. Yep.
Yep. So, I mean, these are kind of things.
Everywhere.
Yeah. So, what a year. I mean, I recommend it highly, but it's like millions of dollars. I mean, the Air Force is investing a lot of money.
Indeed, they are. What of all the types you flew, what's maybe one that jumps out at you that you never thought you'd be able to even sit in that year?
I don't know. I mean, let me just list a kind of airplanes we
please.
flew. I mean, you would do all the military fighter types. There were a couple of sorties on the Tornado because they wanted to. For me, that was old hat, but they were letting the other guys find out about the flight control system and things like that.
A swing wing jet has to be very special.
Tornado and the Jag. They used the Jaguar a lot for. It was almost like one of the syllabus airplanes. I hadn't flown any much heavies by that point. So, I mean, I flew the US Navy had a P3 for a research bird. We had a fighter cockpit in the fuselage with all these FLIR sensors in it and things. And so I flew the P3 and we got to fly all the rotary wing types, just one-off flights on the school, which for you would be the Gazelle and the Link. There was a week when we went gliding in the evenings. We went to a kind of gliding club because we wanted to gliding things.
Such a pure form of flying.
Oh my gosh, the spinning. We used the Tucano as the spin without. So, and that was a highly instrumented thing. So the spinning, we were doing these, we had to fly in these 14-turn spins all the way down. And you have to investigate, the spin. Is it going to be suitable as a student spin trainer? So you have to investigate misapplied controls. Like, what happens if I go in the spin and I just put out aileron all the time? What kind of mode is it? What if I do alternative recovery techniques? Like, the student does the wrong recovery, will it come out or does it get worse? And things. So after these, you're doing about 10, 14-turn spins. Boy, your head is spinning. So what else did we do? I mentioned the DC-3. Oh, they give us like aerobatic airplanes, like the Cap 10, which is a French little aerobatic thing. All these Longchevacs and things like that. So a lot of them are you doing a detailed report. Some of them were you just what they call it qualitative evaluation. Just one flight, go up, give us a quick, either a one-page report or a verbal debrief. They're just trying to expose you to more different kinds of airplanes and things. We got to go to the Paris Air Show, and now we're kind of hanging out in this kind of circle and stayed in a hospitality chalet while they, at the Paris Air Show. Some years, of course, it's the Farnborough Air Show. They alternate. But what a year!
Sounds like a wonderful year. Yeah. But after that, where do you go next as a fully qualified test pilot?
Right. Well, I stayed at that base, and it has changed a little bit now. They used to have several test squadrons. I went to one that was called the Fast Jet Test Squadron. It combined all the fighter types in the RAF at the time: the Harrier, the Jaguar, the Tornadoes, of course, and
Typhoon at that point?
Typhoon was with the manufacturer still, so we were sending test pilots up there regularly to fly with it to monitor how things were going, but it wasn't actually released to the RAF yet. But that actually reminds me of what my life was like, because the Tornado was going through a midlife upgrade at that point. British Aerospace, all those projected map displays were now being replaced by digital maps. So they were putting a FLIR in there, all the NVG stuff, avionics upgrade. And one of the ways that RAF had written the contract with British Aerospace is that the RAF test pilots got to do 25% of the development flying, so we could keep an eye on it as it ticked along, which is kind of sounds more impressive, because who are the British Aerospace test pilots anyway? They're retired RAF test pilots anyway, so we kind of knew them. But once a week or so, I was going up to the British Aerospace base and flying a Tornado test flight, which on a Tornado airplane that actually belonged to the manufacturer, at various stages of the development to check, and doing a bunch of test cards for them. So there wasn't so much just a look-see. It was actually we were helping them progress through their test program, and that's the stage that the Typhoon was at too. It was some of the guys who were assigned to the Typhoon were going up there regularly, flying it to make sure the development program was going on okay. And that was a great tour. It was looking back, and it was really all systems, research and development, but also certification. We were talking about new helmet-mounted displays, new targeting pods, new multifunction color displays, and for the Jaguar and the Tornado, new integrated nav solutions, where it takes the GPS and the terrain following stuff and all mixes it into a nice nav solution. So lots of system stuff on the Tornado and the Jag. The Jag was also going through a avionics upgrade, and I became the project pilot for it, which was nice because I'd never really flown the Jaguar. So here I was having to, I flew it in the test pilot school because, I could fly it, but I hadn't done an operational tour. So knowing the real details of how it was operated, I had to, visit the Jaguar wing a few times and say, what do you need out of this?
It is the perfect name, I think, for the way that airplane looks. And it looks so beautiful. I don't know why. I just think the Jaguar looks like a mean machine. It's
probably the worst airplane I've ever flown.
Really? Why would you say that?
Small, thin wing.
Okay, fair.
2 T45 engines. It's got the Adur engine, right?
Indeed.
With a small afterburner.
Afterburner, yep.
Way underpowered. No weapon stations, no load carrying capacity.
Sidewinders on top
because
of the
there's only 2 hard points, right, on the strength. So so you want the fuel there and 1 centerline station. So one of the ways they thought, well, let's put the sidewinders on top. It's just a perfectly good place to fire them from. Problem is, when you've seen the guys on the carrier reloading the side, 2 airmen can carry a sidewinder on their shoulder, slide it down the rail, cock it, done. If it's on top of the wing, you need gantries and loaders, and so reloading is way more tricky than it should be.
Short takeoff and landing was one of its attributes,
no,
right? Oh, no.
The
okay.
Jaguar only takes off because of the curvature of the Earth. It goes down, uses so much runway, and eventually the Earth falls away and it scrapes off the end of the runway.
Maybe I'm misremembering. Maybe it was really
it's
robust.
It's got really
landing
soft,
gear?
really low pressure tires.
That's what it was.
So it lands on highways.
Yes,
and even grass. But it's.
Have you landed the airplane on grass?
I have not.
Okay.
No. But I've seen video of it landing on
scary.
grass.
Yeah.
Because it's really low pressure tires, and that's why they were designed for landing on unprepared surfaces. But yeah, it's very underpowered. Angle of attack limited to like 14 units, so trying to maneuver it, it's just...
Was it an interceptor? It was a low altitude reconnaissance
It was
platform?
designed initially, it was a joint British design
French,
to be an advanced trainer. And they went, when this came out, and they went, whoa, that's not going to be good for the students. So let's make it into some sort of a light attack machine. And they put a laser designator in the nose and a few other things. But at the end of the day, it wasn't really designed as to carry a long load, not much fuel.
Okay, what's your favorite thing about the airplane then? How about that?
About the Jag?
Yeah, favorite thing.
It's single seat. So I finally got to fly my single seat. This is before I ever got to the F-16 here at Eglin, but you have to prove yourself that you can do this mission on your own. And those Jag guys, I have a lot of respect for the guys in the Jaguar. The Jaguar was finally retired in 2006. It's no more. There's no more of those guys. But
the Indians, I think, still fly it, right?
Yes, I think you might be right. The guys on the Jag squadrons at the time, full of respect for them, doing that mission on their own. Basically our kind of mission too, but they didn't have a navigator to help them with the workload. So it was kind of cool the first time because on the test school, they're all the two-seaters, as you would think. So when I got to the test squadron, first time I had a test mission to do on a genuine, and there's no seat behind this. This is cool. My first ever single-seater. So
tell me about Boscombe Down.
So Boscombe Down is it's a big test base, big, huge, long runways, 10,000 foot plus runways. Historically, it was the establishment. It was called A squared E squared, which stood for Aircraft and Armament Experimental Establishment, and so it's where all the weapons testing was done, way from World War II and before. It might even be from the 1920s. Eventually, the Brits have kind of civilianized, contractorized, or whatever. It's now got a civilian designation. There's this quasi military / civil service / private enterprise company called Kinetic that runs it now, that do the testing. So it's going to change its nature a little bit. I was there when it wasn't called Kinetic. It was called DERA, Defense Establishment Research Agency or something, Defense and Evaluation. So it's gone through a few changes there. There's always been a small RAF unit within this big civilian base to handle the RAF personnel there. It had the test pilot school plus all these, a rotary wing test squadron, a heavy test squadron, the fast jet test squadron, and actually one of those university air squadrons that I was on years ago was one of them there. So the Bulldogs were there too. When I was there, that was the end of the Bulldogs. They were getting replaced with a Grob trainer. So a variety of things going on. We used to have on our tour, on our squadron there, test squadron, we had a USAF exchange officer that I got along very well with him. Of course, I met him later when I came on my part of the exchange. It's a nice part of the. Most of our fighter bases are off in the Highlands and in the Welsh coast, and now we're somewhere that's in a very pleasant part of English countryside. You're just like an hour from the outskirts of London, and from the south coast. So life seems a little more refined. It's actually, if you've heard of Stonehenge, the famous one, it's almost outside the gates of the camp, right by the base there. It's right there. You flew over it every time. In fact, when I moved off base into a house that I bought, I drove the road past. I looked at Stonehenge every morning as I drove to work, right at the side of the road there. So it's in that part of the country. There are some army ranges there on what they call Wiltshire in Salisbury Plain, which would occasionally go and do forward air control and close air support stuff with them. So the Army have a lot of, that's where the Army School of Infantry and the Army School of Artillery and the Army School of, I don't know, whatever else is all right there. So it's a huge military area, Army and Air Force. So I enjoyed my time at Boscombe Down, but it was cut short because I got to come on this exchange to the US.
How do you get picked for that?
Well, I'd wanted this, I mentioned I'd been putting on my dream sheet F-16s, US Air Force for a while because, when you sit around the RAF rooms, they're all bitching and whining about the problems with the RAF. And very popular for people to apply. Just get out of it. Go and fly in another Air Force. They've all got the cool airplanes, and you get out of the RAF, admin nightmare for a while. So I don't know if there's very constructive whining, but But anyway, it became the in thing to try and get an exchange tour, and the RAF has them with. All its allied, France and Australia and Norway and blah, blah, blah. And I thought, I'll go to the US. I always find the US fascinating. I'm not good at languages, so I don't want to go to France, or even though they would send you on a language course and that would be a skill you'd learn out of your tour. But I thought, let's keep things simple. Let's go to an English-speaking country and let's go to the US because, I find that fascinating. And they've got all the best equipment. Very sought after, and I never got it. But then 10 years later, I've been putting this on. I've now narrowed the field because now I'm a test pilot, and there are a couple of exchanges that have for test pilots only. So I was asked, they needed to replace somebody, and I was asked if I wanted to be considered, and sure. That's actually a kind of sad story. We used to have two test pilot exchanges with the US Air Force, one at Boscombe Down and one at Farnborough. Farnborough is just another hour up the road. And of course, the numbers have to be the same. So there's a couple of RAF guys. There was one at Edwards and there was one at Eglin. We closed down Farnborough. We stopped being a flying base. We still have the kind of buildings with the research scientists and geeks, but they moved all the flying to Boscombe. So they said, the Americans said, well, this is not good. What's the point, the Farnborough thing anymore? We'll change that exchange. We'll send him to, the numbers will be the same, but he'll go to some other training base or something. So we went down to a single test pilot exchange, and it was going to be Edwards Air Force Base on the F-15E Strike Eagle. The guy out there doing it at that time was a guy called Lee Fox, and he was they were chasing a B-1, was on a weapon drop, and they had two chases, an F-16 and a T-38, and Lee was in the T-38, and there was one of those part-time 06 guys, on a ground tour, but not assigned. What do you call that? He part-time. He kept his flying up a few hours a month, not that current, and he managed to slide right through the formation, took out the T-38, and they were killed in the T-38. So they needed him to be replaced, and we didn't have anybody. We were a bit short of numbers. The US were very gracious. They said, well, although the numbers are uneven right now, you don't need to send somebody out until Lee was due to be replaced anyway. So effectively, I was asked if I wanted to go out to the F-15 exchange in Edwards if I wanted to be considered for it. I said, oh, sure, I want to go and fly a great airplane like that. I don't care. And they asked around the test squadron, and a few guys were like, oh, I'm not sure I want to take the kids out to the desert. So there were a few guys who were kind of not as positive as I was. But it's like in the military. So I thought for a long time that this was likely to happen, but it's like orders can come out of the blue and you never end up doing what you think you're going to do. So I'd said I was keen. And then the phone rang one day, and in fact, I was in a meeting, a conference table like this, days before cell phones. So a secretary comes in the office in the middle of the meeting, passes me a little yellow Post-it note that says, "Call your desk officer ASAP." Desk officer is your career manager at the personnel center. So weird. So I kind of wasn't a very interesting meeting anyway. So I went out and used a phone in the hallway there and called him, and he said, right, the exchange has come up, your name's in the frame, do you want it, or your first refusal? He says, oh, by the way, it's not F-15s in Edwards, it's F-16s at Eglin. And I went, yep. And he says, well, the reason I'm calling you now is because the training course starts on 2 weeks, you have to leave in 2 weeks on Friday. So I had no time. So I said, you bet I want it. So, and of course some of the other guys were saying, oh, F6, that sounds a bit, can I do that? I said, no, I was prepared to take it when it was Edwards. So
he who was going to take the bad deal now gets the good deal.
Right.
Yeah.
Not that F-15s in Edwards would be
anyway
a bad deal.
Yeah, let's be clear about that. Yeah.
The reason the exchange had been changed is because Lee had reported there was a lot more security problems with getting a foreigner to fly. He'd spent half the tour flying the T-38. Eventually, they said his name got approved to fly the Strike Eagle. They just felt that overall there would be less security concerns for a foreigner at Eglin than at Edwards. So they said, let's make it Eglin. So therefore, when I came out here, there had been a gap. There'd been no RAF guy here for 3 or 4 years. So I was kind of starting up. Normally when you go to an exchange, there's an overlap of a few. So the guy can show you the ropes, introduce you around, help you find a car and a house and a bank and there was nobody at that time. But actually, the way it happened, so I had 2 weeks to sell my car, motorcycle, my share in a Tiger Moth, which I told you, get all my arrangement. Because you call up the people who do the moving and say, yeah, we need 6 weeks notice. I said, tough luck. I've only got 2 weeks notice. You've only got 2 weeks notice. Get the truck here, get all my furniture in storage. So it worked. And I went after a quick stop in Washington, D.C. to go to the British Embassy, to the military section, just to go through how they're going to how you claim all the money and stuff like that.
It's always the paperwork.
Yeah. And then back on the plane over to Phoenix to Luke Air Force Base by the F-16. I think that's where the F-35s do their thing.
It is.
Those days it was an enormous F-16 base, like 8 squadrons of them. If you included the fact there was, I think there was 6 training squadrons. The South Koreans had a squadron there for training, and there was a couple of operational ones that did a lot of the lantern pod stuff. So massive base. I mean, like over 200 F-16s there. That's bigger than some air forces, and it's just one base. Fascinating for me. Of course, Phoenix. I mean, there's no British city like that, and that was fascinating to live there for 5 months. It kind of worked out good as a test pilot. You sometimes fly airplanes with very little time. I mean, you think when you fly a prototype, of course you might have done some simulators, but you're right in, and they could have just said, "Oh, go and do a couple of rides, an instrument check ride, and go out." But they didn't. They said, "We're going to give you this." They called it a TX Track 1, TX for transition. It was about 2/3 the length of the B course, the basic course, about 40 rides. So it covered all the phases, all the BFM and the well as well. So that was great because I really learned all the US Air Force kind of SOPs and formation thing. And it turned with some things where initially, clearly I didn't know. The guy's trying to waggle me into formation. I'm thinking, what's he doing that for? Because that's not the signal in the RAF. So I had to learn. It was good to spend the time learning all that kind of thing. And to do it meant that when I came back to Eglin, I could hit the ground running because I knew all the weapon employment modes. The other thing, what I thought was quite interesting, the F-16, particularly if you put the lantern pods on it, the targeting pods, and the terrain following pod, it's kind of got the same mission as the Tornado. But here, Tornado, you did the OC, you did all the ground attack, the lower levels, the ground attack missions, and then at the end we had a little phase of maybe 4 or 5 BFM flights just for giggles, because the airplane doesn't, it's pretty heavy to fight. F-16, although it's a ground attack, that's what we do with it. We started with the air-to-air. After you'd done the instrument phase and you got qualified, we were going to BFM and then intercepts and 2v1s, and we did all the air-to-air phase first. And then we did the low levels in the attack, because that just goes to show what a good fighter it really is. I mean, I'm told that the history behind it goes back to the 1970s when the Air Force had just got the F-15, 1974. Then the F-16 came along and said, oh, we want that. And of course, the DoD, the acquisition was, no, you can't have that. It's way too expensive. You just had the F-15. And they said, well, what if we made it ground attack and replaced the A-7 with it? So they said, no. And so it was adapted from a fighter, put the air-to-ground stores and pylons and air-to-ground modes in there. But at the end of the day, you've got a great fighter. And so those guys, young U.S. Air Force guys, 23 years old, that I was kind of rubbing shoulders with, they're learning to fly a great fighter, and quite a handful too, actually. Lots to learn.
I'm told it's a spatial D machine, that big bubble canopy you're up high.
You have no canopy arch, and you're raked back, and the things are down here. That's another thing, impression. So in the Tornado, the only airplane that's ever come close to it, when I did an F-18B ride up at PAX, I put on this US Navy harness thing, and I was trussed up. I could hardly walk out to the plane. Trussed up, could barely move. And I thought, this reminds me of the Tornado. The Tornado, you were strapped in. You had 2 sets of leg restraints. You had arm restraints, because the life jacket had sleeves on it with the arm restraints. You were trussed up like a chicken. I got on the F-16 at Edwards. No, sorry. How am I? I'm at Luke.
At Luke, yeah.
So we're not even wearing the life jacket stole. You kind of sat in there. You put this little waist belt around your lap, a couple of clicks into your coat fasteners here, and that's it. I went, I feel like I'm going to fall out. I'm not strapped in. I'm so comfortable. I'm not used to it. And the helmet, of course, the US Air helmet weighs a fraction. The British one is designed for protection, heavy. And the US Air Force one is light. It's got a visor held on with elastic, so it's, that's going in the first ejection, that's gone. So it was just so. And as you say now, you're 30 degrees raked back. You've got your hand on the side stick. All your HOTAS is all there. Your hands, buttons. So what a pleasant airplane to fly.
What was the mission as a test pilot at Eglin? What were you specifically there to do?
Right. So we're at Eglin now, and I was on a test squadron there that actually had F-16s, F-15s, A-10s, a couple of UH-1Ns. And a couple of C-130s, which I got to fly as well. We had 10 F-16s. We had everything that was in the U.S. inventory, because from A models, block, C models, block 30s, 40s, and 50s. Because anything that's out there, I mean, obviously the older unit are the ones that the Guard and Reserve units have got. But if anything needing testing, of course, we had to have a representative airplane. The F-16 has 5 possible engines, and we had 4 of them. Spread out. So you were flying, and each of those engines have different limits, different air start procedures, blah, blah, blah. So, it's nice you felt like you were almost flying a variety of airplanes, although they all basically felt the same. Eglin is the air armament center for the US Air Force, right? So it's armaments, weapons. On the F-16, there's no internal bomb bay. Everything goes on the outside. So every time you put something on the outside, it's going to fly a little differently. So unlike my first tour in Boscombe Down, it was all system stuff. So really the airplanes all flew the same, but this was actually great. This was now the other side of it. It was all flying qualities and handling, because now the US Air Force has got a massive inventory of different weapons. So if you want to put some of those, a couple on those in this way, the matrix of possible combination loads is enormous, and you all have to be tested. So the first thing you would do with a new weapon would be safe separation. So you start in the heart of the envelope, maybe 10,000 feet, 350 knots. It would go out over the Gulf with a wingman who's got a photographer in the back, high-speed video. You've got lots of little cameras around your airplane videoing the release. You go and check there's no boats out there, 350 knots, pickle it off, and then they go back and they check that this. Now you may have seen some of those old videos from the 50s and 60s before we learned this about bombs coming off, and they just come back up and take off the tail and things. So that's what we're trying to avoid. And then you build it up, maybe 50 knot. And next day you're going out at 400, 450, up to whatever they decide is the desired envelope, well, usually 600 knots. And then you've got to start doing it at different dive angles and different Gs. You take the bottom being maybe 0.5 G release, so still positive G. But what if the guy's in the small bunt while he actually pickles it off? Is it going to damage his own airplane? And then obviously various other G. So a weapon released, and that's just for one. Now you might have to do all sorts of other combinations. So, and those are just dumb bombs. They weigh the right amount. They have the right aerodynamic properties, mass properties, but they don't have a warhead in them, of course, or any guidance. They're not smart bombs. They all end up in the Gulf of Mexico as fishing reefs for the Then now we're into the era, of course, of smart weapons. So we're also a lot of the weapons we're checking that you can. When we've done the safe separation phase, we're checking that we can communicate. The bomb is communicating with the data bus on the airplane prior to launch, and in some cases after launch as well. The weapon programs that we were testing when I was there were lots of nice acronyms for you. JDAM, Joint Directed, which is basically like a 1,000-pound bomb with guidance fins on it. JSOW, Joint Standoff Weapon, which is a bomb now with wings that slide out so it can glide in from like 40 miles away. WCMD, which is Wind Corrected Munition Dispenser. So that's like a cluster bomb with a variety of, you could put different things inside in your submunitions, but again, it's guided. There were a few programs going on at Eglin that said, sorry, no Brits, so I didn't get to participate, but no regrets at all. There was more than enough interesting stuff for me that I would never have got in England. So, I was very, I loved that tour. I'm flying the F-16, and just the resources. I mean, the ranges we've got at Eglin, the land ranges, instrumented, the air. The RAF only has currently it has 14 tankers. So if you want a tanker, you virtually need an act of parliament to get one to support your flight. We would have a tanker to support our test mission. So we're out in the range to extend our test time. He's testing in orbit at the side of the range of the whiskey ranges there, and we do our test points. So we get down to low fuel, off to the tanker, plug, get gas, go back. We're a personal tanker, not for me, but for the mission, for the test mission. Just the resources are just phenomenal. So we can get things done. So I enjoy just being a part of that kind of organization.
Were there things as a graduate of Empire that you could bring that the folks that had graduated from the Air Force school, from the Navy school, I'm sure in some cases, did you have a different way to look at things, or was it all very, very similar because airplanes are airplanes?
The courses, the only way that the various air forces will tolerate the constant exchange of people is if the courses are so similar. I'm told that Edwards is a bit more of a computer geek, FTE oriented course at Edwards. PAX is a bit more like, get the feel of it all kind of thing, fly by the seat of your pants. And
don't think, just do.
Right, exactly. and the French one has a different, so but those are minor flares to it.
Sure.
The course, so really, absolutely, my training at Empire really stood me up just fine for what I was doing it.
You're just one of the boys. You're just one of the bros.
And that's the way the exchange program works, right? While I'm on exchange, I'm still paid by the RAF, my salary. And what I was sorting out when I went to Washington, D.C. was how they were going to transfer my salary to an American bank. The only bit of money, if the U.S. Air Force sent me TDY, like to Edwards or something, they would pay my airfare and per diem on there, because that's really related to the job. But my salary was still from the RAF. But other than that, the RAF has no, I just got scheduled like a normal guy. I mean, I got used like a normal guy would. It was, the RAF was quite distant to me. I just felt like I was on the squadron. I just got rid of my RAF flying suits. I wore a US flying suit with my RAF rank in it, and I even got used to the US gloves. Those the RAF, those nice white thin leather gloves.
White ones. Yeah.
I got used to the gloves. The only thing I used to wear my RAF flying boots, because I felt those US boots were so big and clunky. So I wore my RAF, and that's the only bit I could never accept. But boy, great tour. All those, doing all the weapon testing.
Any missions that stand out? Any flights that you really remember distinctly from that time?
One of the interesting ones we did was the is it the Tomahawk missile that comes out, the cruise missile that comes out of a submarine or
TLAM, Tomahawk land attack missile.
So they would launch those things, and this is where I did rub shoulders with quite a few U.S. Navy guys. They would launch those things from a sub or from a ship, either on the east or the west coast of the Florida Peninsula, and we would chase it. So this is a major exercise in coordination. You would go out there with a couple of F-16s, a couple of F-15s. Usually in the back, you would have a U.S. Navy guy who'd come down from PAX, a kind of a project guy. And he's got, they have a little special mod they would do to the airplane just for that day, where he's got a little joystick. He can take control of the thing if the missile goes haywire. But so you go down, and the trickiest ones were the sub launches, because he's launching it from under the water. So you go down to this landlong. There's usually a little standoff frigate or something, and it's all on a sign. You're doing this racetrack pattern. And you're hoping that you get the racetrack right, that you roll out, and right in front of you, whoosh, out of the sea comes this thing, and you want to get eyes on, but also radar lock, because when he goes tail on, very little to see. You are now chasing a telephone pole. That's all, not very much to hang on to, really. And of course, if you've blown it and you're nowhere near it when it comes out, so you're now chasing it. But it's such a long, and he would the ones on the East Coast were even more complicated, because the missile was programmed to go up to like 7,000 feet to cross Florida in the air through the airway structure, and you're doing ATC for it. Of course, you're coordinating as you go through. I'm just coming through with this. I'm the wingman for a Tomahawk missile here, and then it would drop down until altitude. Sometimes they were actually launched on the West Coast. It was a bit simpler, but at a certain point you would run out of fuel, so you would tanker sport. So you would designate. You'd be going up and down from the tanker and bringing in a couple of wingmen, come down, take over from me, and I'll go back to the tanker, get my gas, and this thing would do just patterns to INS waypoints out over this ocean till it was tired and it had been whatever. And then it would come into the Eglin ranges and then do some terminal maneuver and go down with no warhead. I mean, just to bring it down to earth again. So I just thought that was such an exercise in coordination, because you're going to and from the tanker with about 4 fighter planes. The timing on this thing, so that you're the right place when this Tomahawk missile came up. Now, sometimes they're fired off a ship. That was slightly easier. But the timing still had to be perfect. But it was always strange to see this thing just come out of the water.
That's incredible. Yeah.
Now, when you think about that, that's not actually a test pilot event. But it's a huge. I mean, any fighter pilot would love the challenge of coordinating that, because it's just an exercise in coordination and chase.
Yeah.
You're not actually evaluating the flying characteristics of anything, but we'd have all these other weapons on. You're making sure that not only do they separate, but the F-16 has a tendency to have flutter characteristics with various weapon loads, so you would do a lot of flutter testing missions, as well as loads missions where you really want, step inputs and banging the controls around, making sure, as well as the functional, high speeds, make sure you go around with the throttle wide open for like 30 minutes, trying to get the aerodynamic heating, on the store, to make sure that it doesn't heat up too much or something, just to spoil the avionics inside. So there's a variety of things you do like that. Yeah, the F-16 has a LCO thing, which is called limit cycle oscillation. So it's not pure flutter, but you can get to the point where the airplane's just vibrating so much your eyeballs are doing circles and you can't focus on the instruments. So that's done heavily telemetried. You've got the airplane is covered in strain gauges and accelerometers. It's got a telemeter down to the control room. These guys are looking at all the traces, and if they see something that's about to be divergent clutter, it's like they've got a mic, they've got their mic in their hand already to say stop, back it off, kind of thing. So I remember doing a lot of flutter flights in the F-16 with a variety of stores on it.
I'll send it to you later. As an RV4 guy now, obviously we both have Vans airplanes. I'll send you a video of a fluttering tail on an RV4 and how terrifying that is.
Yeah, because you think that's going to break off any second.
By the time you see it, or by the time you feel it, usually you're dead.
Yeah.
So we talked about. Obviously, Bruce, I think so many differences between your experience in the UK and here, but one of the things I think we have in common is a call sign. Got to ask the story of your call sign, because I know you got it here in Florida.
So just for the listeners' education, the Brits really don't go for the standard Maverick Goose kind of call sign things. It's not so formalized. Some guys will maybe get one because they've screwed up or they've got a particular personality. Mostly it's just a sort of shortening of your name, something. So I came out. I didn't really have a call sign in that particular. I came out to Luke Air Force Base, and although I was 10 or 12 years older than the young students. I was actually peers of the instructors, you know, and I would tend to hang out with them, and you know, I'd done a couple of tours already. So, but anyway, the students there, midway through the course, there was a Friday night naming party where it was very formalized. Everyone had a name, of course. So they had, and of course I participated in the Friday night party, and whatever mess up the students had done or whatever, that became their call sign or something. And it was like a drum roll, and you know, each instructor would take a turn to kind of one of the students tell the story of why he was given. And of course they'd already arranged with the guys who make the patches. So the patch, so they said, your call sign is, and it's a bit like, you know, Animal House kind of scene there, you know. And he would come out and get his Velcro his patch on there with his new call sign. So I was kind of part of that course. You know, I was around at the same time as a kind of student, although, you know, probably more experienced than some of the instructors. But they said, "Oh, Bruce, we're not leaving you out. So your call sign is," well, this was 1999. One of the movies that was very popular that year was the Austin Powers, the second Austin Powers movie, which was called Austin Powers, The Spy Who Shagged Me. And they just thought that the Austin Powers character was hilarious, and this word shag. So that was a hilarious British word. So your call sign is Shag. So I was Shag for all my years in the US Air Force, and politely, I think it's some sort of dance. Is that right?
Something like that, yeah.
But they didn't realize that they'd actually hit the nail on the head. RAF slang. If you're on a squadron and you're not an exec, you're not one of the leadership, but you're not one of the newbies either. You're just kind of a, you know, guy who's pretty experienced, useful guy, but he's got no real responsibility. You're known as a Shag. A Shag on a squadron is just a good, and that's basically what I was. So they didn't realize they hit the nail on the head. So my call sign was Shag, and I still, of course, I have a little plaque in my office, actually a big board with I saved all my name patches from all my assignments, and I've got I can trace my entire career beginning to end with arm patches and name patches, and Shag is right in there.
That's so cool.
Mm-hmm.
Good story. better than most. So. Where'd you go after Eglin? What was the next stop?
Well, I was approaching 40 years old. I'd done 5 tours. I was still loving it. If I'd stayed in the RAF, I would have hoped to have gone back to Boscombe Down, because I was short toured out of there. I felt there was unfinished business, lots of good things I wanted to do there. But I had married a lovely American girl while I was here at Eglin, local girl from Fort Walton Beach. So we had options. You know, she could have come back to live with me in England, of course, or, you know, I could have applied for a green card. And really the first option was really what I lent on first, because, you come back I'll do another 3 years, and then I'll have reached, there's a kind of, in your career path, there's various leaving points at age 38 and 44, and then I could leave at my 44 point. That means I could have maximized my pension potential. And then we'll come back to the States, and I'll try and make my way in the new world, you know. I had a couple of RAF friends who had also married Americans, and I bumped into one, and the other one I kind of tracked down, and they had done kind of the same thing. Married an American, gone back to finish their RAF career. Actually, one was Royal Navy Sea Harrier pilot, and then they tried to come back to the States, and they both said to me, "Bruce, stay where you are." He said they had green cards because they were married to Americans. They had got their FAA, ATP all sorted, but they were trying to get a job in the US from Europe. And they said, couldn't even get anyone to reply to them. They wouldn't take them seriously when they were over there. I mean, they just weren't getting any response. So both of them actually said they actually had to up the family, move to the US without a job, rent a house so that the top of their resume can have a US street address. Same qualifications, you know, ATP and green card, and all of a sudden now they got a bit of interest from employers. So they said, Bruce, you're in the US, you know, you've got a US address, you're starting to make some contacts. You know, several of the guys that had been in the squadron had gone out to the airlines or gone to work for Lockheed Martin or something like that. You're starting to make some contacts, stick with it, you know. If you go back to the UK, it'll be much more difficult if you intend to go back. So that's what I did. I handed my notice in. It wasn't one of my planned leaving points. I had to do what they call a PVR, premature voluntary retirement. Basically, I gave the RAF notice. I had to give them a year's notice that I wanted to leave at not one of my designated leaving points. And And I did that, and I only went back to the UK for about 3 weeks to do the out-processing thing, and then came back here and started looking for a job.
So Bruce, obviously a big transition, leaving the military into the civilian world. So where'd you go next once you left the Royal Air Force?
Logically, I would have gone to something like Lockheed Martin or one of the manufacturers, try to keep in test flying. However, I discovered quite quickly on investigation that they needed security clearance. They wanted a U.S. citizen with secret security clearances. And of course, I'd worked on classified programs while at Eglin, but then I discovered a big difference between being an exchange officer with that status and, working on classified programs. All of a sudden, I'm a civilian green card, non-US citizen. So they really weren't interested, which kind of felt a little weird at the time because, I think, well, I'm still me. I feel still trustworthy, but all of a sudden, I couldn't really get in there. And I couldn't even get into the Boeing commercial aviation, commercial airliner side. But they wanted US citizens too. I think that's something their customers insist on. So airlines are not so fussy. If you've got the green card, you're good to go. So I focused on getting an airline job. I got my American US FAA ATP converted from my British one. So I had all the qualifications. Wasn't that easy. That's not long after 9/11. So it wasn't actually that easy to get an airline job. Most of the majors had hundreds, in some cases thousands of pilots laid off. So they weren't going to be hiring for a while, for sure. But there was a kind of niche in the market, what we'd call low-cost national-size airlines like, Southwest, JetBlue, AirTran, even Spirit and Frontier. That's the kind of, I was focusing on those. And anyway, I was lucky enough to get picked up by one of those. Very excited to get started in my airline career, which I flew that phase of my career for 11 years, actually, in the airlines. And actually, looking back on it, I enjoyed first of all, the lifestyle kind of worked out. Our kids were young, and it was a domestic airline thing. So I would typically pick 4-day trips, and I would have 4 days off away on the road and 4 days at home. For those who are not familiar with the way that you build your own schedule really in the airline, and you can get tempted to fly a lot to make lots of money, but then you're never home, or you can be really lazy. So you have to find. It's up to you to find the right balance about how much paycheck you bring in and how much time you spend at home. For me, I think it worked out about half the month. I'd be away half the month, but only in 4-day stretches. I wasn't like one of these FedEx guys who's going around the world for 19 days. And sure, you get a long time off at home, but that's so long away from the family, you're losing touch with what's going on. So I kind of got used to, to that lifestyle. The actual flying was, it was better than I would have thought, or anyone would have thought. Here's a guy who's coming from a fighter test background, thinking that F-16s at Eglin. If you were given some airplanes on any given day, there's many missions. I could have been doing a variety of various test missions. I could have been chasing them. If we had a couple of airplanes to go training, we'd be doing BFM or intercepts or low level, or or even if you were a single ship, you could still do instruments or what we'd call flight test techniques, where you go off and practice pulling G's very accurately. And at the end of that long list is possibly a cross country from A to B, and that's all you're doing is that final mission in the airline every day, 3 times a day actually, which seems very repetitive, but you kind of got in the groove. Same thing every day. One guy's walking around the outside, or the other guy's loading the FMS with the route and the weights and balances, and then you're waiting for the final numbers as the passengers come on board. Close the door, call for the before start checklist, push back. Kind of after start checklist, off you go, single engine taxi, take off, put the autopilot in. So it actually, in that sense, it was quite repetitive. It helped that I was at an airline that was growing quite fast, because I got to upgrade to captain relatively quickly in airline terms, about 2.5 years, which I think made a huge difference, because now all of a sudden you're caring about whether the weight and balance is right, and and when they call up and say we've got an altercation between 2 passengers back here, you're kind of trying to manage the situation without actually leaving the flight deck. And so the variation, when you're using your noggin, your little grey matter, really, it's not when the weather's nice and you're just going A to B with the autopilot. And there's the weather. Thunderstorms. You're kind of rerouting around thunderstorms. Holding, of course. The airline always sends you off with min fuel. That's how the dispatcher's working out your fuel plan for you based on the load and the winds and all that. And then they want, because that the airplane burns more if it's heavier. They can save millions of dollars a year by sending you off with min fuel. Now, I think our dispatchers in general were excellent. They were, sometimes I get a little comment. You don't meet them face to face. They're in the the operations center in some other city. But the dispatch release gets printed out at the gate and handed to the captain, and you can see all the thing. And sometimes I'll put a little comment in there. I'll give you another couple of £1,000 because I don't trust the weather, or I don't trust that it's getting congested in that airport. It might be holding. And if you felt uncomfortable about that, you could get on the phone. Their phone number would be there. You'd call them up and you'd make a joint agreement. Oh yeah, let's stick another couple of £1,000 on. Never got that denied. But in general, you're going along with just enough fuel to get there with your, shoot your approach, go around, go to your alternate, hold for 30 minutes and land. So if you get to holding, you are now calculating quite, you're getting onto dispatch, what's my options for where I can go and land, and keeping a good close eye on the fuel. And if you get, there's a certain amount of flexibility there. If you get down to pretty much close, you can get onto dispatch and say, I've got about one more turn around the hold. They said, stand by. And they're making a phone call on the other line there to their contact at the ATC center. And funny old thing, you usually get pulled out the stack and you get sent down, because the air traffic control system don't want airplanes diverting all over the place. They would rather, cope with that. So there's the holding stuff, winter ops, all this de-icing stuff we do up there. The military fighters, it was snowy and icy. We just didn't go flying that day. So I had never done de-icing, all the procedures, which you really have to get right, go by the book, and can be quite complicated. Every airport's different. Some of them are slick at it. Ones like Denver and those kind of places where it happens every winter. But I had to learn all those kind of de-icing procedures. So there was enough of that kind of stuff to go on to keep me interested. And as I say, we made captain, which was really nice. That meant the saying is that means you're flying with your favorite captain every time, because it's not. But as a first officer, you're really having to do it his way. The other thing I noticed about airline flying compared to military flying, I mentioned we do a dozen different types of flight. We might have done an F-16, and you're supposed to be pretty competent and follow the SOPs. Be standardized as best as you can. But the main important thing is get the mission done. But in the airline, you've only got one mission, and you need to be word perfect. And that's really the only way to standardize an organization that's got 10,000 pilots, that's what the big ones have got. We had 1,500 pilots at our airline. You're flying with, they can schedule with anyone, and you can virtually know what the next guy is going to do, when he's going to do it, when something comes up, because it's all standard procedure. Every call out, every checklist call, so there's a lot. You're expected to do that one mission perfectly, and that's how we'd all want it. If our family were flying on the flight, you'd want those pilots to be not making it up and cowboys up there. You want them to follow the standards. I did the airline thing. The other advantage about domestic, we haven't got the time zone jet lag thing going on. We would typically fly, I say 3 2-hour flights a day or something like that, with just minimum 45-minute turn in between, and then go off to the hotel for a layover. The layovers were not days long, but they would be 16, 18, 20 hours long kind of thing, just to get you to the next day. And I also did I wouldn't recommend it, but the commuting thing. It's possible, of course, for airline pilots not to have to move to every domicile that they're posted to. And I guess posted is the wrong word, because you volunteer for it. They post a vacancy notice, which might be for the Boeing 737 captain. We need another 20 Boeing 737 captains in Orlando or something, and then you can bid for it. And if you've got the seniority, then you get assigned to it. But you might not want to move your family around every time you chase one of these moves, and so you can fly for free, standby on your airline, or in fact, because of a pilot group to pilot group arrangement, you can fly on other airlines too. So I actually did a lot of my flying on commuting on Delta. So thank you very much, Delta. I really appreciate it. And you're allowed to fly up on the flight deck too, because you are, the qualified pilot, your TSA clearance and stuff. So I almost got to see how another airline, how they run their flows and their cockpit procedures. So that's really the life of an airline pilot. Then in 2015, I moved over to Airbus, unless you would like to quiz me on.
No, the only thing I would ask about the airline as we kind of wrap that up, I have a lot of good buddies that do that, and they all have good stories. Any good, I don't know, be it the weather, you already mentioned kind of passenger drama. I feel like there's a lot more that goes on that people don't really realize unless they know something.
I had a real bad EP type thing. I never shut down an engine. People have asked me this, what have you dealt with? The thing would come up regularly, at least once a week, is medical. Somebody in the back has not feeling well, no, heart attack would be extreme, but
definitely not feeling well.
So that's what you were dealing with. The flight attendant, we've got a passenger in this seat, like feeling faint or blah blah. So and there's this established procedure for that. Obviously, we can't leave the flight deck at all, but the company has got a contract with a medical thing, and you get the symptoms of this. They tell them to take their blood pressure and from the medical kit and the basic vital statistics, and you get on, call dispatch up on the other radio. They hook you up with this phone patch of this doctor and describe what you as a captain want is the decision made for you. Do I divert or do I continue to destination? That's really, and the contract, they carry the liability for it. If the doctor says you're good to take him all the way, he'll be fine, and then it turns out not to be the case, it's not on you, it's on the medical company that they do this. So
really, I would not have thought that. Yeah.
So they, when they sign it, when they're paying, I'm sure they have a huge liability premium.
I'm sure. Yeah.
But that's how it's done. And so regularly and then of course you have to get onto the station and say, all right, we're coming in, have the EMTs meet us, and then of course now you have to get the normal stampede when you turn off the fasten seatbelt light. You have to persuade everybody, hey, we're coming into the gate now, please everybody stay in your seats while we get some medical people on. And mostly they would obey, but sometimes it was a bit awkward because people were desperate to dash off to their connection.
Sure.
So yeah, that would be the most common one, was just dealing with a medical situation in the back.
Makes sense. Well, you kind of already alluded to it. You got to return to your roots, flight test.
Yeah.
And in a totally different way, though.
Things were going well at the airline, but I was eventually a U.S. citizen. Once I'd been here for enough years, of course, I got my U.S. naturalization and passport. I did it for a couple of reasons, because after 9/11, we basically trained those hijackers, in Florida flight schools. So anyone who's not a U.S. citizen who goes to do a simulator has to go through TSA. So if you have to give them, I think it's usually about 4 to 6 weeks to get approval. So the problem is when you're trying to get a job and airlines calling up and saying, oh, right, we've got an empty new hire class starting on Monday, can you come? And you say, well, yeah. So, but when you apply for this permission, it's for a specific training class. So they can't just say, oh, we'll apply in general, so you're standing on standby. So they say, oh, we can't get you in the next class. Well, then you never get there from here because... Yeah. So, but the airline, they're not allowed to discriminate against green card holders, but the practicalities of it, it's more awkward. So that's the new hire thing. Unfortunately, I did find an airline that was prepared to go through that hoop for me and get my name in. But then it comes down to recurrent training as well. Once a year in the sim, you have to get you approved, and it's on the training department to do that, not you personally. But it's just another hassle. And in fact, it was ridiculously illogical. I have a colleague at work who although he's here in Mobile with me, he's a qualified flight instructor at the Airbus Training Center in Miami, and he's Canadian. So sometimes he's said, "Oh, can you come down for a few days and help us out? We need some jet rides done." And then at the same time, and you're due as well. So so he goes down there and they forgot to apply for it. So literally, he's instructing in the box, and he steps out for 5 minutes. So when it's your turn, oh, we forgot to apply. So he can't go in and do, because he's the student. You have to set of rules. You got to stick to them. But sometimes it doesn't make a lot of sense.
Bit of a disconnect there, right. Between logic and the rules. Yeah.
And the other reason, of course, my kids were born over in the States, so they're very apple pie, and I think it sends the right message.
America's home, yeah.
If I didn't believe in the country that I was living in. So basically, as soon as I had done enough years, I applied for my passport, which now, of course, getting back into test is possible. I didn't rush back into test. Life was going along fine in the airlines. But then I heard that Airbus were building a new production facility in Mobile, here on the Gulf Coast, and where I spent most of my time in the States and love it down here. My wife is from this area. So I thought, hey, this could be right up my alley. Get to stay down and get back into test flying. My resume was probably quite good for that, because they were looking for test pilots, but also somebody with a bit of airline experience. I had flown 2 types in my 11-year airline career, Boeing 737 and the Boeing 717, which people are less familiar with. That was a McDonnell Douglas design that was taken over by Boeing. So the cockpit design, quite different from the McDonnell Douglas design. So now I'm applying for an Airbus job with no Airbus time. But actually, it's funny how it worked out. I had a couple of a casual, informal interview with the chief pilot, and then a more formal one. And I'm trying to say, with this. He said, "Provost, relax. Stop trying to sell yourself." He says, "I like the fact you haven't flown the Airbus, because now you will see the defects that everybody else has become accustomed to." He liked the fact they're a very customer-oriented airline. So the fact I had been a customer airline, knew how the customer pilots thought about it, was actually a real plus. So down in Mobile, they had, if you know the history, they were going to actually build the new tanker for the U.S. Air Force. And it was contract was awarded, and it was going to be partnered with Northrop Grumman, and then the contract was cancelled and went to a competitor. So nothing, even when I heard about the tanker being built down there, I thought, that might be good. I haven't done much tanking or flown with A330, so I knew my resume wouldn't be so strong. But once about a year later, they said, well, we've kind of done all the planning for this new factory. Let's just build it. We've got a backlog of airliners. Let's just build those. And I said, well, that's even better for me, because I can sell myself on that point. So Airbus have built this new facility in Mobile at the downtown airport, now renamed the International Airport, which has been a great economic boost for the city, which is why they wanted them to come there. I'm sure they're getting some tax breaks and stuff, but I don't know the details on that. But it's certainly been now you've got some well-paid jobs for people who are learning a trade. It's not, even if they don't end up working for Airbus for their whole life, they've now got skills in aviation manufacturing. It was nice to go there right at the beginning, because it had that, as the buildings were going up, and that it felt like you were in a startup, which is exciting. But this is a startup with a massive company behind you and a 10-year backlog of orders. So a kind of low-risk startup, which is almost the best of both worlds. And I got started there in 2015, while we were still putting the assembly lines together. 1 week of in-dock, and then over to France, to the main Airbus facility in Toulouse, France, to learn to fly the Airbus, to learn to see how they did their testing. Initially, I was doing, production testing, but after a few months, they let me fly along in some of the development rides as well, for the new improvements to some of their airliners that need to be certified. So I was there for about 8 months, and that was wonderful to live in France. Took the family over there, and learned the Airbus way. Airbus airplanes themselves, I mean, what a clever company. They were the first in the mid-'80s to come up with fly-by-wire airliners and glass cockpits and the whole FMS all wired in together. ECAM, electronic centralized aircraft monitor or something. Basically, where all your failure messages come with all the emergency checklists are all right there. And those airplanes, that was the A320 was the first one, entered service in '88, and they're still building them now. They've been such a successful design. And what you get out of the fly-by-wire is all this envelope protection. It's a side stick controller, not the same as the F-16 though, because F-16 is a rigid stick. It's sensing the force you put on it. Has a tiny bit of give just to make it more natural, but it's got a force transducer in there. The Airbus side stick is sensing the angle that you move the stick, position. So it actually moves with not much force. So you fly through the side stick. Again, it's a pilot demand system, and there's no trim button. The thing just retrims for every speed or every attitude you put it in. Makes it very simple to fly. It's a G command system, which is our load command, which was what the F-16 was. So if you pull the back on the stick angle equals a certain G, and so to fly a constant G maneuver, which we actually do when we're testing the Airbus, is actually relatively straightforward. In other regimes, it becomes an angle of attack based system for the slow speed, and it's a slightly different law, takeoff and landing law as well. But also, you can't really depart. And if an Airbus, any of the products, is working in normal law, so that's all the flight control computers working, you can't depart at control flight. You can pull the stick back, and this thing will come up to 30 degrees pitch and stop. Then stick's hard back, won't go more than plus 30, won't go more than minus 15 bank, won't go more than 67 degrees of bank. So you can actually maneuver as hard as you like, and it won't get into an unusual attitude. And there are speed protections as well. If you start to dive near VMO or VNE, it just basically starts to do a gentle pitch up to get itself back in it basically says, I know what's going on, but more than you do, and so I'm going to ease it out of this dive that you're in, and so it's got speed protection, attitude protection, all sorts of things, and the FADEC engines. It really makes it a very simple airplane to fly.
I imagine is that part of the acceptance flight program that I guess because what you're doing, you're going to go out and test those corners to ensure that protection still exists?
Obviously, we're not doing certification,
of course,
or development stuff. What we're doing at the factory in Mobile is checking that the plane meets the certification.
It meets the spec.
Meets the spec. It flies like it should. So yes, we do flight control. We do what I've just described. Pull the stick back and back, we take it to the corners of the envelope and check that it does do all these recovery. And we take it to the maximum altitude and the maximum speed. And a lot of the time we're actually checking all the systems. We're like everything's got a backup system. So you're turning off the primary system and letting the backup come in, whether that's the generator or the hydraulics or whatever. You're checking out all the backup modes, and actually we do degrade it. We turn off some of the air data computers and let it collapse into a degraded flight control mode, eventually run down in direct law, where your stick input is just controlling the control surfaces. And it handles not bad at all, really. There's a little bit of perhaps Dutch roll or because it hasn't got the yaw damper in anymore, but it's very flyable even in direct law.
For the FCF stuff, I've done functional check flights. Obviously, very, very different. In the military, we were always very, very much min crew. I assume when you're doing a flight like that, it's probably two test pilots up front.
Yeah, we can't take any passengers or even guys from the company along. Yeah. Flight 1 is considered moderate risk, so we have 2 test pilots. And there's a kind of a matrix in our flight order book about how if this is a prototype first flight, it needs 2 experimental test flights, and it comes down. For us, actually, we only need 1 test pilot, and the other guy can just be a line pilot. Here in Mobile, we got 4 test pilots, so we're kind of over the top. But so we have 2 test pilots. On the jump seat is a flight test engineer who's basically a test conductor. He's got a big manual of test points, and you're going along. He's taking the data. He's got a little laptop computer, which is kind of hooked in with a Ethernet thing into the guts of the E&E bay. So all the parameters are being recorded, and it tells him when the data is stable and things like that. So he's basically briefs each test point, the limitations on it, maybe a quick reminder of the techniques, and then all the switches we need to hit to degrade it into whatever mode. And then we do the maneuver and takes the data, and we get it back again. And then we take one further guy in the cabin who's actually got the title of ground test engineer, but although he's actually flying, but he's one of the guys who's really a systems expert. Before we go out for a test flight, they will, it comes out the factory. There's a big kind of meeting, which we call FOT. I think that stands for Final Operational Test or something. The airplanes, as they're being built, they're testing the components as they put them in there. But when it comes out the production line and gets handed over to the flight test department, then there's a big kind of meeting where we kind of accept it. We don't want to take any defects and things and sometimes, occasionally, we'll say, well, there's this part is missing, not a critical one, but we'll take it because the logistics chain hasn't caught up with it or something like that. So we take control of the plane. There's a few days of ground testing, where we they sit on the gate there with all the power on, and they've got a huge checklist of things, and that's when they run the engines and the APU for the first time, which of course, they've come from the engine manufacturer. I assume they do something, maybe they run them on the workbench, but when we start the engine the first time, it's a big cloud of smoke because it's got all this kind of packed in grease and that kind of thing. So they do all that. The ground test engineers will taxi the airplane. They'll go out to the high power area and run them at full power and do a variety of things. And then the first time the test pilots actually get involved is when we do rejected takeoffs, because now that's more of a high speed down the runway. And we'll do a couple of those, one using the maximum thrust reverse and another one using the max auto brakes. Airliners have, you might not be familiar with this, basically if you reject your takeoff by slamming the throttles back, the brakes come on maximum automatically. Better than you could do, and all you have to do is remember to add in a bit of thrust reverse and keep the thing straight on the runway, and it's going to come to a stop for you. So we check that those kind of automatic functions, and that being a bit more of a dynamic maneuver, we get the test pilots to do that rather than the ground engineers. Anyway, the ground engineer, he does fly with us because he's checking all sorts of systems. Listening for noises is a huge subject because you quite often get little rattles and things going on, and he takes noise recordings of them, and then they get sent over to Toulouse. They match them against this database, and they'll come back to the next day and say, oh, that's the left-hand underwing upper screw jack pinion pop, ding, ding. So they can recognize faults by the noises they make. So that's big. Plus, if there are any just kind of ambient noises, we don't want to go out with the customers and they say it's too noisy. If we've got some reference to say, we've made a recording of this, it meets our agreed contractual requirements that you agreed to when you bought the airplane, then. So it takes the kind of guesswork out of it. So monitoring the noises and stuff is very important. So there's a crew of 4 for those first flights. They last about typically 3 hours to run through the profile. I've described that we do, check all the systems. We do some low-speed flight down to the, proving the thing won't stick all the way back in normal law. Those protections.
And I assume you're at altitude. You're not doing this.
Yeah, we're doing that. We do that. We get a little block of altitude between about 10 and 15,000 feet, so that and it doesn't lose much altitude.
Where do you fly? Are you out of the Gulf?
Well, yeah, we prefer the Gulf. Sometimes we can get into the military whiskies if they're not being. We're second behind the military. Otherwise, we get routed down south of the Q routes. The Q routes go between like New Orleans and Tampa. So we go down south of that, and still under Houston center control. Usually there's very little traffic down there, and we can play around there. But if there's too many storms there, as there is at this time of year, then our dispatchers will file us for an overland route. And we've been to the various centers to explain what we do, and they're very cooperative, and we get airborne. And now they're used to us. When we ask for a little block of altitude and specific headings and things, then. They're very good with working with us.
One of the folks I'm hoping to get on the podcast next is someone who works in ATC here locally, and I have nothing but wonderful things to say about our Navy controllers locally, our TRACON folks, center controllers, Houston Center.
Well,
really good
Pensacola guys, of course, deserve a medal for handling all you trainees out of Whiting.
Indeed, they do. But that's a great point, right? You've got students that are talking on the radio for the first time, flying for the first time, all the way up to flight test, military aircraft. It's very, very dynamic, all in this little chunk of airspace.
Yeah.
So they're great folks.
Yeah. So that's how we run the missions. If there's any defects, then that we can't revalidate on the ground, we might need a check flight, which will be a short flight just to check something. That happens. I think for our reflight rate is we're at 1.4, I think. So that means that some of the airplanes require a second flight and some don't. And then you occasionally get the outlier that needs half a dozen. You can't seem to nail it down, but that's just a statistical anomaly. And then the customer airline will come in for about 4 days and go through all the airplane records, which are computerized. It's an electronic logbook, and we'll fly a flight with one Airbus pilot, one technical pilot from that airline, and then a whole bunch of their guys in the back. There seems to be more emphasis, I think, whether there's any wrinkles in the carpet than whether the electronics are working. So they're looking for perfect decor, all the in-flight entertainment's working, all the seat backs and the tray tables are all perfect.
Of course. And they're paying, I'm sure, very good.
Yeah,
they want to make
You wouldn't go and buy a new BMW and accept a little scratch on the leather, would you?
Of course not,
So the same thing. But you just know that the first flight that goes into service, people are putting their feet on the seat. So we fly in our flight, and it's a similar profile, not quite so wild, such a wild ride with the maximum, attitudes and things, but because we've now got a few people wandering around in the back, and that lasts a little bit shorter.
Is it a profile defined by you or the customer? Because you have many different customers.
It's agreed, yes.
Okay.
Each year there's a standard profile, and we try to get them to adhere to that. But if they feel strongly that they would like to see another test, they can chief pilot. If they can make that agreement, they have a kind of a waiver to do an additional test point and things. So, but we don't make it up on the day. That's what I'm saying.
Of course not. Of course not.
We will repeat points if they want, or we can even demo if it's more of a dynamic test point. They can ask us to fly it if they would just rather observe. But typically, they don't want to get on with it.
Is it a test pilot from that company?
They don't usually have test pilot grads. Some of them, it's funny, it varies from airline to airline. Some of them are just like some chief pilot from some base, fairly senior pilot. The larger airlines like American, they actually have a base where they do all their technical flying. So these are guys who do nothing but FCFs and things. So they're kind of technically oriented pilots, but without a formal test pilot certificate. When I mentioned the custom airlines, one of the strategies for setting up a factory in the US was really because, globally, Airbus has about 50% of the airline sales, but not some. In the US, it's lower because, understandably, American airlines want to buy not the U.S. airlines. I can't even say that. They're all called that. Airlines based in the United States.
Perfect.
They want to buy American products, of course. You know, I'm an American now, so I can see the logic in that. But if we make these airplanes, they might come from parts from all over the world, you know, but if we assemble in the US from the US jobs, you've kind of deflated a lot of that argument. And we have a backlog of customers. So all our customers are US. We know we've had requests from some of the South American airlines because this will be closer to pick the airplane up here than Europe, but we've got a backlog of US airlines because if they're built here, they also don't pay the same import taxes and things. So, you know, it's a financial saving as well as convenience to them. So, we built planes for, I think, 7 or 8 airlines now, you know, Delta and American and JetBlue and Spirit and Frontier and Allegiant and Hawaiian, and I'm probably leaving out a couple, but...
all the big names, though.
Yeah. And we build the A321 there and the A320, which are the same family. And then...
What is the difference between the two?
Length. Seats.
Okay.
Yeah.
Same airplane, just stretched essentially.
Stretch.
Okay.
So maybe a slightly more powerful version of the engine. And there's lots of customer options, you know, how many features they want in the softwares and stuff. So no two customer airlines are the same because some have selected some options and some, of course, the cabins are totally different, but, you know, we don't care about that so much. The other interesting project that started a few years ago was that Airbus took over the C-Series airplane from Bombardier. And that company has now been renamed Airbus Canada. So they're still making those airplanes. They're called the A220 now. The Airbus gave it one of its designations, and one of the ways to again sell them to U.S. customers. So let's build them here. So we're also building the A220 in Mobile. That is a totally different cockpit, actually more modern. So it's learned. You know, they've learned lessons. It's like it's more similar to the A350, our sort of newest product from Airbus. But now here, it's nice for us as test pilots. We're flying 2 quite different cockpit designs. And now I feel I've seen them all. I've seen the 737 Boeing. I saw the Macdonald Douglas and the 717. I've seen the Airbus, and now I've seen the Bombardier cockpit designs. And they all have things in common, but, you know, little differences. But it's one of the perks, I suppose, of this job is to fly several different kinds of planes. You
mentioned it's a very small crew, 4 of you here in Mobile. How do you guys stay current? Is it something that you're always, there's so much demand, so much, and I say current, you know, obviously there's a lot of different airplanes that you're qualified to fly, and I want to get into the list later, but I mean, is there upset training that you guys get to do? Is there a lot in the sim? What's the training syllabus?
We maintain, we got type ratings in them, and we go and do our normal type rating, sort of recurrent, you know, stuff every, you know, year or so. But there's no real currency thing for doing the test maneuvers. You know, we have a very thick book called the Flight Test Guide that describes all the stuff that we're supposed to do. The variation really comes in the development flying you do in Toulouse. That's where they're doing some of the more esoteric maneuvers. But what we're doing is kind of the same every day, so we're all up to speed on it, and even when you go away for a few weeks, you can go straight back into it. It's not tricky to pick it up.
The beauty of standardization.
Yeah, exactly.
We had a really cool list of airplanes. One of the ones that jumped out at me was the A400, the Grizzly, right? I think that's the right name for
that's
it.
One of the So that's the new. That's like a Hercules on steroids, basically.
Or a turboprop C-17 is what I like to say.
Exactly. It's, you know, it flies like twice as high, twice as fast, and carries twice a load of a Herc.
And it's contra rotating props, right? Or it's a little bit different. I saw a French one a couple years ago.
I mean, they're like 6 or 8 bladed big things out there.
Huge.
Yeah. And this is, I mean, what a great airplane. Same, but if you climb into it, I could climb into it as an airline pilot and know it's using all the same kind of screens and buttons and whatnot, except of course now they've got a black surround rather than a light grey for, you know, military and night stuff. But yeah, it's got all the same. You know, it was relatively easy to design that because we had all the expertise in the flight control laws. So we just built a tactical airlifter using all that Airbus technology we'd already developed, and it's been sold, you know, to I think a dozen different nations. I got a flight on that when I was over doing my training in Toulouse, and it was a nice plane. Yeah. What
was the flight that you got to do? It was just an exposure flight, basically.
What happened was they needed a plane taken from Toulouse. There was a plane in Toulouse doing some, when the parachute drops stuff, and then the main construction airfield is in Seville in southern Spain. That's where they make them. So this plane had to go back to Seville, and they said, "Bruce, you haven't flown this before. You go and get your flight." So we did a high level, and then we dropped into low level at the end just so I could see what it was like to maneuver.
What's it like
it's a
down
tactical.
low?
It's the same. I mean,
Really?
It just handles beautifully. I mean, that's the beauty of the commonality of all these Airbus designs is that from the 320 onward, all the modes are the same. I've flown the 380, the big double-decker, quite a few times, and you completely, even when you're hand flying it, you forget it's like this massive airplane behind you. When you're maneuvering. In fact, usually there's quite a large team of engineers in the back checking everything out. You have to be quite aware. Tell them to sit down if you're going to maneuver it. It just feels like a little baby A320 when you're flying it. And then as soon as you hit the ground, you're suddenly overwhelmed by this sense of mass and momentum. So taxiing it, and you suddenly think, my gosh, it feels like I'm taxiing the Titanic here. It's huge. But it's only on the ground did I notice the size.
It is a huge airplane.
And, up and away, it just, it flies like a little 320.
I think it was a Chinese airline. I was at Mojave this last Sunday, and I'd never seen an A380 in real life. Mm-hmm. And I think it's in maybe a semi-preservation status, but we were in the pattern, coming for the break, obviously. And I looked down, I thought, man, I think that's a 380. But when we got closer to it, just maybe a massive machine.
Several airlines had to park a whole bunch during COVID, so maybe there's still some out there.
Yeah.
Production line's just finished. Just in the last few months.
It is done.
251 they built.
Wow.
Which was a little less, of course, than they hoped. I think the philosophy was that, all these really busy international airports where you can't get a slot or a gate for love nor money, well, then it's off for the airlines. You can get more passengers, sell more tickets to get in and out. And they hoped, I think, but actually the airline market changed a little bit, and these long, thin routes to minor cities became the thing that airlines thought they could make more profitable. So they didn't sell as many as they hoped. But what a technological achievement. Kind of like the Concorde, technological marvel, but never sold very well.
Indeed. Well, I know you have a Concorde story. I want to get to that at some point too. But you mentioned the A380. Could you tell me more about what was your involvement with the airplane that you got to fly?
Gosh, I haven't flown it for a few years because I haven't been over to France very much with COVID travel. So I've done quite a few of the production flights, but similar to what we do on the 320, which is a similar profile, but now you're doing it with the big airplane and turning off. Of course, they've got 4 generators, not 2, and four of everything. So you get to fly around. You do that same flight control check where you take it up to 30 degrees nose high and pulling 2G. Most airliners, and Boeing's too, are certified to about 2.5 G when they're clean. So we tested out. So putting G on the airplane on its first flight is quite a useful thing to do. You're checking that the flight control system works. You can check the protections by pulling to the limits. And also putting a little bit of G on it, just things like the overhead bins, you just want to settle them in, put a bit of force on it. So, we pull up and we bunt over. So
you bunt over in an A380?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, that's incredible.
No, we don't go negative. Otherwise,
of course
otherwise it's an astronaut trainer in the back. But we keep it barely positive.
Sure, sure.
So people are feeling light in their seats, certainly, if they're back there. Yeah.
And
actually, for those flight control checks, we insist that everybody in the back is actually strapped in.
Of course.
We're not practicing astronaut training.
Not at all. Flight control stuff is very serious anytime you say those words, yeah. Another really, really, really unique airplane I remember was on the resume is the Beluga.
Yeah, the Airbus, because the parts are built in several factories all over Europe, they came up with this philosophy early on and they had the Super Guppy originally. Then the, that's turboprop thing, big bulbous thing. I think Boeing.
Just to be clear, you said Airbus had Super Guppies? I didn't know that. Okay.
And then they quickly, when they had the A310, which is one of their first wide-body designs from the 70s and early 80s, they made 5 of those into a Beluga. They put that big thing, and they flew them around. Well, because the wings are made in England, and the forward fuselage is made in Germany, and the aft fuselage is made in Spain, and the tail is made in somewhere. So you have to bring all these parts together. Quickest way to do it is obviously by plane. So they decided with our newer, larger planes like the A350 and 380 that we needed a new one, and these 310s were getting a bit old. So they've just finished a certification and construction program to build what we call the Beluga-XL. So that's based off the A330, a lot bigger plane. It takes 2 A350 wings at the same time in there. So I got to fly that last time I was over. It was still going through its testing phase. And again, it flies wonderful. In fact, if anything, they've improved the handling qualities from the baseline A330 because we're a little smarter now. Fly-by-wire back then was state-of-the-art what we did. But, now we're smarter and we can design out a lot of these. Now, basic A330, if you're coming down final on a crosswind, it's quite a bit of a lag and roll, and you're constantly picking out the wing, and, there's a bit of workload for the pilot. Well, I just flew the Beluga, and it was just sweet as anything. They've got rid of that, so it actually flies better. And we don't have to worry. When we do improvements to the flight control laws, and the handling qualities. We have to be careful we don't improve them too much, because if they become significantly different from the baseline, then all of a sudden those pilots are type certified. The airlines or the authorities, FAA, will say, no, you can't fly a mixed fleet of old ones and new ones. So we can only improve them so much. But the Beluga is going to be a completely separate type certificate, flown just by exclusive little mini airline of pilots. So, we could really get it perfect. I think I flew it from Toulouse over to Shannon in the west coast of Ireland. We wanted winds that day. It was crosswind stuff. And
Shannon is a windy place. Yes. I've been there a couple times.
And we were doing like slam takeoff things, because basically if the winds comes from a crosswind, it kind of goes underneath the fuselage and goes into the downwind engine. And so if you sometimes get a bit of a almost a compressor stall if you slam the engines to takeoff power when you're stationary. So what we were doing was seeing what you'd end up doing is giving advice in the flight manual to say, in a crosswind situation, just release the brakes, let it roll out to 20 knots, and then fly full power, and then you'll be fine, because now you've got positive flow going down the engines. And we were just going slightly slower each time. We got to 12, 20, 15, 10, 7, and then now it's what, 5 knots, we slammed to full power. Oh, now we got the little engine problem. So that's what now the guys over there are doing those missions all the time, but I only get to participate in them once in a while. It's nice to do the development flying.
Of course.
Yeah, so the Beluga is impressive. And then, strangely enough, it's because they've kind of taken the nose off and kind of glued it underneath. You're no further off the ground than in a 320. So on the ground, it's not like you're in a big airplane like in the 380 or the 747. You're way up in the air. You're kind of quite close to the ground. So you have to remember that you've got this big airplane behind you, and you can kind of go back in the. It's a bit like a submarine almost. You go back behind the flight engineer station there, and there's a hatch in the roof, and you go up there and look, and now you've got this enormous. It seems like an indoor stadium in there. Huge space.
Massive. I didn't know. And you mentioned earlier I didn't realize you'd fly the wings of an airplane inside another airplane. Yeah, incredible.
350. Yeah.
One of the things I always like to kind of talk about is the corners, highs and lows. As a test pilot at Airbus, what are just some of the things that you get you up in the morning, you enjoy doing, and maybe the other side of stuff that's a challenge, always keeps you professionally interested in what you're doing.
There's no real downsides. I love it. The Airbus is a very flexible company. The training, I could have thrown at the deep end. I went over to Toulouse after 1 week in the company doing the admin thing, and I went on the flight schedule day 2 to fly an A330, which I'd never flown before. In France, the DGA, which is the military side of their kind of administration, controls all test flying, whether it's civilian or not. So I had sent over a copy of my licensed medical and test pilot certificate. So I arrived and said, you could fly anything here. So without any training, any sim, I was up on an A330, never having flown any Airbus product or simulator, not on a training flight. It was one of those check flights where there's a few things to check, so it wasn't too busy. It really illustrated to me how intuitive the airplanes are to fly, because I'd done some airline flying, so I thought, right now I need to be doing this in the FMS, pulling up this approach, or hitting the flight control panel to request to level off, to turn. And so if I looked for that function, there it was. So all the functions were there I wanted. Hand flying, quite intuitive. So, later on I did the proper simulator full type rating package. Lasted 6 weeks in the training center. But initially I was just thrown in the deep end, and that was really a great way to learn the airplane, just to see how intuitive it was. And that's kind of how. I think that's really the French influence. They're very practical and just get on with it to the thing, rather than, coming up with some awkward procedures to learn things. So I enjoy the French flavor of the company like that, the way they just get on with it.
So in addition to flying for the military, flying for the airlines, flying for Airbus as a flight test guy, you fly general aviation on the outside as well. I think that's actually our common friend. I'll give Clay a shout out. Hopefully going to interview him soon, but that's how we got to speak together. So I know you've flown a little bit, obviously, over at the, you know where the Duck is and his little airstrip, but you have an airplane of your own. Tell me about the RV4.
Well, I'll take it right from the beginning. I remember I joined the RAF way back, and I didn't have a private pilot's license before I joined that. My first flight, almost my first flight in a light airplane, was sortie number 1 on the RAF training syllabus. And actually, I went through quite a long period, even though I'm obviously the kind of kid and man who loves everything about aviation. The RAF flying was more than enough for me, and I was, so I didn't really I didn't have any sort of civilian license till about the mid-90s, when I was halfway through my RAF career, when I started to think, I think I might want to carry on flying professionally, after I leave the RAF. So I got my British ATPL, which of course gave me general, private privileges. So all of a sudden I did finally have a license to do some general aviation. And I remember I was flying the Tornado up in Lossiemouth on my third tour, and I saw posted on the notice board of the officers' mess, there was this picture of a yellow tiger moth saying, looking for, extra members to, be part of our little flying club that runs this plane. And this was about a month after I got my first civilian license hand. I'll try that. So I kind of joined this, unofficial club that flew this yellow tiger moth from a grass field right beside the military field. And I thought this was great, Talk about back seat of your pants flying. Tiger moth was a classic airplane that was basically trained the World War II pilots of the RAF. That was where they started. Some of them in Canada, in fact, and other places they exported it to. But they built 8,000 of them, so it was a prolific trainer. And there are still at least hundreds flying in the world. It's very popular to maintain it because it's such a nice plane to fly. And I flew that one there. And later when I was at Boscombe Down, I heard about a share of one. This one I had to buy myself into the share, but that one was actually even nicer condition. So I was part of 2 groups that flew the Tiger Moth, and nice plane, strong, powerful pitch, big tail, and a huge rudder.
It's got a tail skid, right?
It's got tail skid, which is a steerable tail skid. So it does help a bit, but really you want to land on grass so it can grip. It will just skid, it literally will skid around on hard surfaces. So I think I only landed on concrete once, and I wouldn't recommend it. Clearly built for grass airfields. It's only got ailerons on the lower wing, so it's not like your pitch special for high roll rates. So not really the best harmonized. So I say the pitch rate is good, the rudder's powerful, but the ailerons are really slack. So not the best harmonized plane in the world. You can do basic aerobatics. It's got a 120 horsepower inline engine that spews oil out all over the inside of the cowling every time. And it's got they call it slots in the real old RAF manual, which is the upper wing, little. And the position, you basically had it was in a lock to unlock position. There was a little switch lever on the right. So basically, if you got to the stalling condition, they would just suck themselves out and actually create a bit of, a slot of air and delay the stall by about 2 knots. So the Tiger Moth was great, and I realized even though I've been flying jets and things, I could appreciate aviation at that level. Open cockpit biplane. I mean, that's pure, isn't it? I came over here and Clay McCutcheon was very generous to let me fly some of his older, J3 Cubs and Cessna 120s and things like that. I now have a share of an RV4. No, sorry, I own an RV4. I don't know why I said share, which is just a great. It's a great design of best of all worlds. It's very slick, basically. For 160 horsepower engine, I can lean it out and cruise at 150 knots ground speed, which is really good for cross countries. On the other hand, I can do aerobatics at the weekend, and I can go and land at a little grass field. So I just think it's what Vans call it, total performance. I think it was I stumbled across this, and it was actually at Milton before I bought it. Although I was looking at barnstormers all over the country, it turned up right on my doorstep. It was owned by a guy called Brian Smith, who is a special ops guy at Hurlburt, and also part-time there now in also Delta A320. So I have actually heard him flying the T6 on his reserve role in and out of Mobile. So a colleague of yours, kind of. But he wanted something bigger for our family, and I took that over from him, and it was a great choice. I really enjoy the general aviation in that.
2 points or 3 points when you're landing? I'm always curious to ask other tailwheel guys.
I think the tail low 2-pointer is about right. Now, it's like you 100% concentration for every landing in a tailwheel airplane, right? There's no
phoning it in.
No, exactly. And so I'm not saying it always turns out that sometimes you go for the 2 point and think, that was 3 points. But you definitely don't want to drag the tail in. That can feel quite a bump on the tail wheel.
When you go tail wheel first and you feel it surge forward onto the mains, it's not comfortable.
Not how to do it. But I usually aim for a tail low two-pointer. Yeah.
Milton's a great airport, very, very busy, very active.
Yeah.
I will say I was very spoiled. So my home airfield in Tennessee, 3 runways, an old World War II airfield, right? In that kind of that diamond that you think of World War II airfields. Hampton Roads, even in Norfolk, it's a cross, but the shorter runway, you couldn't use it at night, the crossing runway, but big, long, I think 5,000-6,000 foot main runway. Keeping the airplane at Ferguson, it is not, I think, maybe a little less than 3,000 feet, and there's obstacles there's trees on the one end.
But they have grass and hard parallel, so you got an option there.
You do, which is nice. One thing I will say, at night, the lights go around both runways, right? Because it's parallels, essentially. So I have been on short fun I'm on the side of the asphalt.
One wheel on the hard grind.
I didn't get that low. I scooted over before. Okay. But I had never really given it a lot of thought. Full flaps, nice and slow, using the first inch of the runway and landing it until I had to. And it was kind of it's always a good challenge, right? Because you go to a big runway, crosswinds, whatever. I think the thing about the RV, you look at a normal tail dragger, S-turns. That's the way it's supposed to be. In a Mustang or a T6. You can just look over the nose.
I can look over the nose. I can see where I'm going.
Such a good.
The target moth, that was clearly designed back in the days of big square farmers' fields to land in. You always landed into wind because it was, not very well harmonized for roll and things like that. So our little group gave ourselves a 10 knot crosswind on the target moth.
That's your limit. Yeah.
But whereas the RV, I've landed at more than 20, I think, and it's really not a big issue.
You just have to stay current, stay proficient. My brother and I jokingly say, dual custody. He's got it now in Tennessee for a little bit, and I'll get it in a couple months, and a couple flights knock the rest off, and then it just feels right at home because it's a great machine. Yeah, awesome. RV4. It's a good machine. I don't know. I've had a couple flights in RV4s. RV4, RV8 as well.
Unfortunately, you're not getting in the back of mine because I'm way too big.
Way too big. Yep.
No, that's the one limitation compared to the side to side.
It is.
It's really like a 1.5 seater. I can take a 130, 150 pounder, but I can't take your average 200 pound male.
Not at all.
Because the CG is it's all from those very pleasant pitch characteristics. You're legally within the CG range. It's suddenly horrible in pitch, almost neutrally stable. And
even an RV8, same thing. It's a bigger airplane. You'd think they fix some of these things. No, you cannot. You can only do so much with weight and balance.
So although I like the little, pointy tandem thing, and that's what I was used to in my military career. And it feels more like my mini fighter. But it's side by side is actually more practical.
Indeed, I'm excited to see for those. Let's see, we're recording this end of July here, so next week is going to be Oshkosh. I'm very excited to see Vance has the RV-15.
Yeah, backcountry plane. Yeah,
I know, and I'm a little concerned. I think it's only a 2-seater. I was hoping it was 4 seats. I'm always looking, I jokingly say it, the next airplane that I want to buy, a tailwheel high wing where I can take the doors off for photos, 4-seat family airplane, I'm sold.
But you think this might...
I think it might be a 2-seater. Which will not be bad. It's still going to be a wonderful machine. But the family plane, you need a little bit more room. So we'll have to see what Vans surprises the world with, I guess. Okay, I said it earlier. I want to make sure I follow up. You have a little bit of time in the Concorde. But I don't know the story at all, so I'm leading in totally blind here. Tell me about the Concorde.
I don't want to oversell it that I was qualified in the plane.
No, not at all.
But if there's any pilots who have never been around a Concorde and they want to hear what it's like,
that's me.
Here's my experience. So in 1994, I was towards the end of my second tour, which if those have been paying attention, that's when I was flying the Hawk as an instructor. And on our base, there was 2 training squadrons. Somebody had a contact who was in the Concorde fleet in British Airways, and he went to the station commander there and said, I think there might be some good mutually beneficial good deals if we can fly one of these guys. So this was nothing to do with me. So this guy basically got permission from the station commander to bring the Concorde guy to our base and fly him in the back seat of a Hawk, give him a ride. And then it was reciprocated because the Concorde fleet in British Airways was pretty small, only had 7 airplanes. Pilots all knew each other. The chief pilot, of the Concorde fleet, allowed the captains to really put passengers on their friends on the jump seat, basically. Not every flight, but they run the idea past him, he would okay it. So this RAF pilot from the base, got his ride, and I vaguely heard this was going on. Well, and I think what they did, they flew the station commander in the Concorde too. So he was all of a sudden a a proponent of this as a good exchange. So I heard this was going on in the other squadron, and it was supposed to be an ongoing thing, shared around everyone. So one day I look at the daily program, as you call it, the day schedule, and they said, "Oh yeah, Bruce, you're flying this big guy from BA tomorrow." So no, okay. So I didn't know who it was going to be, but I put a bit of effort into. I planned a little low-level route, and I booked us into the low-flying area and made sure there's some bullets loaded in the gun. I thought, I bet he's never. If he's a British Airways guy, he's probably not done that kind of thing. So this guy duly arrived, and there was another instructor also had a staff training flight. So I arranged to meet up with him. We did some close formation. I taught him how he got to fire the gun on the range, from the back seat with the trigger. Gave him a nice flight. And again, he had not been prior military, so I guess he appreciated that. And then a handful of us took him out to the pub, for some beer and food in the evening. So as he leaves, and he says, gives me his business card. I said, "Okay, Bruce, I'll give you a call when I can work something out." And about 3 weeks later, the phone rings, and he says, "Bruce, can you get a couple of days off next week?" I said, "You bet." So I went all the way. I drove over to his house. I lived about 4 hours away from London Heathrow, the airport. And he said, just come and spend the night at my house and park your car on my driveway. And I had dinner with his family, and then went in with him. Now I couldn't go through the kind of ops area because I guess you needed an ID for that. So I had to check in, and I went into the first class area for the Concorde thing. And they had a separate first class lounge for Concorde, right? Huge semicircular kind of bay window there, floor to ceiling glass, and all the Concordes are nosed into the window, and it's just beautiful. And all the first class passengers are in there, nice breakfast laid out, buffet and things. So I did all this and checked in and with my little jump seat ticket, and eventually the flight engineer came and got me and said, come, I'm going to go and do the walk around. Would you like to? So Concorde had a flight engineer, and so he kind of walked around the outside with me. Really tall, long gear, way above you when you could walk right under it, of course, two or three times over. It was tall, gangly gear, and we went around the outside and then strapped in. And they said, "Oh, sorry, the flight's fuel. You'll have to ride in the jump seat the whole time." I thought, fine by me. So obviously, two pilots left and right. There's a flight engineer on the right with a big sideways-facing panel. And then there's no navigator. The jump seat is basically behind the captain on the left. Quite roomy. It's not one of these jump seats that folds out the wall. It's a nice, comfortable pilot seat. And the flight engineer, this is all analog instruments. They never bothered. It was built in the 60s, and they never really did an cockpit upgrade. So this engineer is staring at banks of four of everything. 4 generators, 4 hydraulics, 4 electrical, and he's taking data throughout the flight, plotting out a manual graph paper, and then getting on the HF radio and radioing the numbers back to maintenance control in London. So he's the busiest guy on the flight deck. So we go out and it's London to New York, by the way, and we take off about 10 a.m. And we, go on the end of the runway. The nose is all drooped, as you know. The way the afterburners came in, at the bottom of the throttle quadrant were like 4 buttons, one at the bottom of each throttle. And if you press the button in, and so it latched in, then when you got the throttles all the way up, not only would it go to max N1, but then the nozzles open, the burner would light. So we 4 engine afterburner takeoff, and then we cancel the burners at 250 knots, which I thought was amusing because that's exactly the same speed we cancelled it at the Tornado. And of course, the flight engineer does that, and he just leans forward and deselects those afterburner buttons. Of course, I'm just doing 2 at a time to keep it nice and smooth because it's all about passenger comfort. And we get airborne and start heading out west. Now, when it was subsonic over land, curiously, it flew only about 28 or 29,000 feet. Quite a strangely low altitude, I thought. Something to do with the aerodynamics of the wing. And then we coast out over the west coast of England, over the ocean, of course. Then they get that request permission to go supersonic. So then the burners go back in, and this thing tilts up, and it's rocketing up at like 25 degrees nose high. And you go supersonic in the climb, just blasting through it. And you go up to about 52,000 feet, and you just have set the power, and it does this kind of cruise climb kind of thing. Starts one side of the Atlantic at about 52,000, finishes the other side at 60,000. A couple of interesting instruments on the engineer's panel, which you wouldn't normally see in airplane. One is a Geiger counter, because there's so much. Now, not one, just the cumulative radiation. You're getting a lot more radiation up there than you would. So this is just for like crew health, so they can monitor. So you don't have many airplanes with a Geiger counter there. And the other one is a skin temperature gauge. The Concorde, not like the Blackbird, it's made of titanium or something. This is an aluminum airplane. So all that skin friction heating actually heats up. And the limit is about, when it gets up to about 120 degrees C, that's when, beyond that, the material properties of aluminum. So one of the feedback parameters to the EECs, the engine control, is actually skin temperature. So when the skin temperature gets to its limiting value, it starts to trickle the fuel off the engines, and then it can all stabilizes at a comfortable speed. And that's what you get, Mach 2. And so in the back it's quite a narrow fuselage. It's 25 rows of 2x2, 100. It's a 100-seater RJ basically. There's no in-flight entertainment, because just being on the plane is, entertainment enough. There's one big digital Mach meter on the bulkhead, which of course when it goes through 1.0, you get this ripple of applause comes from the back. And the engineers say they just decided, they were told to go out and design a Mach 2 airplane because that would be sexy. 1.95 would not quite be. And he said that's what they do. He said the most he's ever seen out of one is like 2.04 or something. So basically most of the time you get 2.00 or 2.01, and that's when everything's kind of balanced and limiting. And for those 100 passengers, there are 6 flight attendants. Legally they would only have to carry 2, but there's only one class, first class. So they're lavishing on all this stuff. So when it was time for the in-flight meal, I got this big 4-inch steak or filet mignon or something. It was all very nice. So we go across the Atlantic and we're going into Kennedy, and come down, and just like any Delta plane, huge. I don't mean Delta Airlines, I mean Delta wing suite, Delta wing platform. Large angle of attack as you come down, and it just mushes on. You can trap all that air between the Delta wing and the ground. It just mushes onto the ground so smoothly and gently, and then you taxied into Kennedy. Now we took off at 10 o'clock a.m. We landed at 8 a.m. before we'd taken off, which was the whole selling point. All these rich, account executives in, Lehman Brothers and all these kind of people, they can go and do a day's business in New York and not have to leave the night before. So because you can leave at 10 a.m. in London and you're getting into Kennedy at 8 a.m. So that's the business model of it. So we're taxiing in, and the Concorde crews, they were small. Somebody in the Concorde crew had bought a car and left it in the staff parking lot, right, with the keys, on the shield, the sun shield. Now the Concorde crew is 3 in the flight deck and 6 flight attendants, crew of 9. So this car was one of those old station wagons from the 1970s with 3 bench seats, really old thing. So Roger Mills, the name of this captain, says to me, "Well, Bruce, we're here now. It's only 8 o'clock in the morning. Do you want to go into Manhattan and go shopping with the girls in Bloomingdale's, or you want?" He said, "Actually, I own a plane in New Jersey. You want to come flying?" I said, "Absolutely." So we go down to the parking lot, and the first officer had a check ride the next week, so he was going to go and study in his hotel room. So just the two of us, we drive out, of Kennedy, cross the Verrazano Bridge there, into New Jersey. We go to this field, and he's got a T6, Texan, all white one. We get airborne on this T6. It's the middle of September. Weather's just like 9/11, sunny. We fly back over the bay, back over the Verrazano Bridge, VFR 1,000 feet. Lady Liberty's on the left of Ellis Island. This is 94. The World Trade Centers are there. Right up the Hudson River to the Washington Bridge, VFR. And somebody, what are you going to pinch me? I've just flown the Concorde. Now I'm flying in a T6 VFR up New York, Hudson River. What did I do to deserve this? Nothing, because what I gave him was actually free to me. It was my duty to fly him in a Hawk. And then we come back and we land and did a few aerobatics and a bit of low flying over a lake or something. We land and we go back to the crew hotel in Manhattan, the British Airways. And I'm thinking, well, I'm finally going to put my hand in my pocket and buy a hotel room, because I've made no plans for. I'll just go with the flow. So we walk in, and the hotel manager says, "Oh, Captain Mills, nice to see you again," because they go over there every week. They know. He said, and he'd obviously put the word out that I was coming. So he said, "Oh, Captain Sumser, he's been recalled back to London early, so don't worry. Mr. Macdonald can have his room, and don't worry, I've sent housekeeping up and tidy up the room." So basically, I got a free hotel room in the British Airways crew hotel. And then we went down to some bar where all the British Airways crew would hang out. So one of those basement bars like Cheers, and I'm thinking, I need to leave the Air Force and get into this thing, because all the guys. The next morning we get up, we have to leave pretty early because we have to, so we get about 6 o'clock. We're all back in the car, going back out. We stop for the usual coffee and bagel New York breakfast and get out, and then we go back. Now, there was one other thing that I thought was curious, because I'm just learning airline way of doing things at this point. Oh, this is about 2 weeks after I've just done my ATP, by the way. So I'm finally thinking airlines, and I'm thinking, this is the airline life? Of course, it's not really. You're going, it's 3.5 hours, by the way, between New York and London. So you're going long haul distances and short haul times. So no jet lag. Wonderful. So we load up, and there's always a passenger manifest, and he always. Right, Roger's always look at it because there's always some, Henry Kissinger's on it every other week, and Richard Gere, and all of U2, and there's always some celebrities. It's always worth grabbing the manifest to see who's on board. Now there wasn't anyone particularly famous the time after. I think it was some Saudi royal family or something. They've got many princes there, and so we're looking through it, and then the kind of gate agent dispatcher comes out and says, "Oh, we've loaded one bag too many, or one more. We've loaded one more bag than we checked in. Are you happy to go like this?" And the captain said, "No." So they made them unload all the bags onto the ramp beside the airplane, make sure that got all the passengers off down the air stairs to identify their bags. Meanwhile, this is using up time. So the basic deal was, if you bought a British Airways Concorde ticket, which cost twice as much as first class on a 747, and you ended up not being any faster, you got the difference refunded. So the gate agent is getting more and more nervous as this kind of deadline is approaching. But eventually, we did actually get all the bags on, get every push back, and we were about 2 hours late, but not enough that they would have had to refund some money. Now out of New York, you can there's no land, you're right over the ocean. Yeah, so take off again, going through 10,000 feet. Now this is pre 9/11, so we flew with the cockpit door open, and on the way over there'd been a constant stream of interested passengers coming up, to see the flight deck, including, I remember at one point this United Airlines captain came up. He'd 30,000 hours, and this was his retirement good deal for him and his wife. They treated, and he was like a kid in the candy store. Somebody at the peak of our profession was still fascinated by this plane. So anyway, the cockpit door was open most of the time. So going through 10,000 feet as we climb out of New York, and Roger says, "Bruce, just go ahead and close the cockpit door." I close it up, and then he says, "Okay, you want to jump in the seat?" So I swapped seats with the captain, and hand flew it as we went through the sound barrier, and hand flew it for 10 or 15 minutes, and I'm kind of looking over my shoulder going, "Hey, this is great." He said, "No, stay right," because there's a kind of a barber pole thing which is showing you the maximum equivalent airspeed that you can fly for that particular. So you have to fly quite an accurate speed profile within about 5 knots, or the drag it doesn't work, kind of thing. So you wanted me to follow this guidance on the ASI, and so I got on the funny little handlebar, so that you have an Embraer kind of thing. That's the kind of handles, the control wheel that they had in the Concorde. So I got my 10 minutes of hand flying stick time on the Concorde, and then we flew back in, landed on in London Heathrow in the sunset, and I pinch me, I think unless you're actually a Concorde pilot yourself, any other pilot would kill for that experience.
Absolutely.
And what did I do to deserve it? Nothing. I flew the guy in my Hawk, which was my duty for the day anyway.
Exactly.
So there's my Concorde story.
That is quite a Concorde story. The reason I asked about it, and the reason I wanted to hear it, I know a lot of times there's talk of that's something that's going to return to the U.S., and there's several companies that are working very hard on some kind of a supersonic transport. As someone that has seen it, and obviously I'm not asking you to make decisions for the global aerospace industry here, but do you think it's something that can come back? That's something that we can
I think it will be
bring
a market,
value?
because there was a lot of environmental concerns about Concorde noisy on takeoff, supersonic max. They can actually design the supersonic boom a lot smarter now, so it won't really be an impact to the ground. And the engines, I guess, the hush kind of engines. So I think the noise impact will be a lot less. And there might be a niche market, not I think for you and I paying passengers, but I think for if people want, we've produced corporate A380s and things for rich, Arab, people who've got unlimited money, so they're going to want the supersonic. There'll be a small niche market for I think for the corporate aviation.
That makes sense. Time is money. It's one thing none of us get back.
Right.
And so if you're going to spend that money to get somewhere faster.
I mean, you also see these articles about how we're going to have these hyper things that are going to go from Sydney to London in 2 hours by going outside the atmosphere. That seems a bit more, way out there. But I think basic supersonic, I think that's a couple of designs out there are targeting about Mach 1.5 or something, and I think that's quite doable.
Makes sense. It's still a fast machine for sure.
Yeah.
Bruce, as we kind of wrap this up, I have a couple questions I like to ask most folks at the end. And I say the end, obviously you're still flying, still out there actively doing both, not just general aviation, but actually, flying for Airbus as a test guy, a test pilot. Do you have someone that's an inspiration to you as an aviator? It doesn't have to be one person, but I like to look back, and there's several folks that I've flown with, folks that I just know, haven't had the honor to fly with, but they heavily influence me. So that's the kind of person I want to be. That's the person I look up to. Is there anyone you can think of in your career that you feel the same way about?
I'm not going to answer your question exactly, but I'll throw a couple of things out there. When I was a really small boy, the guy who interested in aviation, reading all these RAF stories, there was a pilot in the RAF called Douglas Bader who had lost his legs in a flying accident in the 1930s. And I was given his biography, when I was like 9 years old, and I read it, and became a dynamic leader in the Battle of Britain. He got back he flew basically without legs, and he wasn't everybody's cup of tea. He was a very strong, obstinate kind of character, but I guess that's the kind of mindset he had to get through those disabilities and what. And I remember him as a small kid, reread that book 100 times. So, now I've seen some documentaries about him that say he wasn't actually such a nice guy after all. But at the time, I was completely, mesmerized by him. The other name I want to mention tonight is my navigator from the Gulf War, a guy called Tony Magoo, we called him. Who got me through all those times, and I felt we were a great team together. He died about 10 years ago from cancer, age 46. So thanks, Magoo, for being there with me.
What would you say, looking, again, I always like to say looking back, not looking back that far, but do you have something that you would look at as an aviator, greatest failure, greatest success? Again, I like to find the goalpost, but something that maybe you learn from that defines you, that you pass on to others. I'm always looking for those stories, too, that you can pass on to folks. Anything that you would say that you really came back from or learned from?
I think I was just the lucky recipient of some good timing and opportunities. I think it's I grabbed the opportunities when they were there and didn't pass up on them. And a couple of times that was actually not a good career move, or sometimes moving from airline to airline was not actually a good financial move either. Kind of passed up on a pension that I was just about to get. But so you all I would say is grab your opportunities as they're presented to you. I feel I've been gifted this career, and I'm very grateful for it.
That's an awesome attitude. Type model series, you got such a list. When I read your intro, it's quite a few different airplanes. Mm-hmm. What's your favorite? Which one would you go fly today without any pause?
As I tried to instruct you earlier, but when you're testing an airplane, it's never, is it a nice airplane? Does it perform well in the role? But let's just say for this part of the discussion, just for flyability, for a completely undefined term like flyability, it's a toss-up for me between the F-16 and the Hawk. They're just both wonderful airplanes. In fact, some people have described the F-16 as a Hawk with an afterburner and a radar, more of a war machine. But they both just flew so wonderfully well, and I felt completely at one with them when I was flying them. So if you offered me a ride in either one of those right now, I'd grab it.
I know so many guys that are Viper guys, and that's always the answer. It's first love for them in many cases, but it's a defining love because it's just such an awesome machine, apparently. Yeah. So, yeah. The Hawk, I know for our guys, they always call it a baby Hornet. It's just a good step up, and it sounds like, same thing. What motivates you as an aviator? Where's that fire come from? Because I know some folks, it might sound silly, but I'm not going to say it goes out. Maybe it kind of smolders a little bit. It's not always the defining thing. For someone like me, I love aviation, love airplanes. Yeah. But it's not always the same. Sometimes maybe it changes. I don't know. But what motivates you?
It hasn't burned out. I will have, that's why I didn't really get promoted that much, because I kept asking for one flying tour after another when they were advising me, you need to do a staff tour. But I will still hang around the scheduling office and try and get put on the schedule more than everybody else. And I still will happily fly my little yellow RV4. So the fun of getting in the air and flying a machine. I have no interest in radio controlled models or UAVs. I want to be in the plane. I hope I have the opportunity. As long as I have the desire, I hope I also have the opportunities that I stay healthy and wealthy enough to be able to fly for many more years.
What do you think is next? Do you know what is next for you as an aviator professionally?
I haven't got any changes in mind. I mean, more of the same. I'm ready to do more of the same, and we'll see. Obviously, I'm not that far off retirement. It's now, whether what kind of aviation I do once I can no longer do it professionally. Hopefully I can do something. And actually I would like to do a bit more of giving back, a bit more of the angel flights and the young eagles and all this kind of
such
thing,
a great program.
which I've done so little of. But RAV4 is not a great machine for that. So maybe something that's a bit more of a family tourer, which would be good for the family, but I can actually, give back a bit, because I'm very aware that I've had all this good stuff and I'd like to share it around.
Looking back, again, I always like to say looking back, what would you have done differently? Anything you could look back at, maybe forks in the road in the career, like you talked about, maybe you didn't necessarily chase promotion, you chased those flying opportunities, but is there anything maybe you look back and think, man, I wish I'd said something different, done something different, just changed the course of where you are today?
No, I don't. I'm really quite delighted with having all this flying that I didn't particularly deserve, it's been a privilege. There's many guys out there who would have loved to have done what I've done. I think, I think that's. I think when Tom Cruise, met the Navy pilots he flew when he made the Top Gun movie, he was, for the first time as a mega movie star, was meeting people who didn't actually want to be him, because they would rather be a fighter pilot than a famous Tom Cruise. And that's how I see it too.
That's a really great point. I hadn't thought of it that way. I had recently and a little bit of a movie magic here behind the scenes. So we didn't record this whole thing all at once. In between the last time that we spoke and today, I had the opportunity to fly in the back of a Super Hornet down low. And the numbers you threw out, 600 knots, 100 feet.
Mm-hmm. At the peak. I mean, not all the time.
No, of course. But yeah, for the target profile, right? Yeah. And then at night, right? Yeah. At times, right? I had the opportunity. It wasn't quite that dramatic. It was 400 plus knots and a little below 200 feet. And then when you roll upside down and you pull toward the ground. And
over the ridges. Yeah.
Over the ridges, yeah. Not unlike the documentary that just came out. That's a bit of a joke. But all that to say, it was a very humbling experience, because I thought back to your words. And you were doing it for real. People were shooting. This was not a training mission like I got to participate in as a passenger. Very humbling. Incredible stuff. So I just want to say thank you for telling those stories and letting us kind of listen into that, because that was a tiny little... Getting to hear the stories is the best. Mm-hmm. I just had a tiny little glimpse into that world, and it was overwhelming, incredible, wonderful. I get why people love it so darn much.
So I hope you get to do it a lot more.
I hope so too, and I just want to say thank you for sharing that with us. But I end these all the exact same way, so I'll end yours the same way as well. You got the last word. Anything maybe I didn't ask, or any final thoughts?
No, I just want to say thank you from me personally. It's actually quite therapeutic to talk, almost cathartic, to tell somebody all the details of your flying to somebody who gets it. I don't think I've ever done that with anyone else before. So thank you from my point of view, but also thank you from the aviation community, because you were recording the oral history. I've listened to many of your other podcasts, and just to hear the fact that these stories are being told and now can be kept before the knowledge of them is gone, I think it's a great contribution. So thank you for doing something quite worthwhile.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. And it's funny you mentioned that. I said I'd give you the last word. I'm going to steal a tiny little bit of it here, because I've never actually explained why I do this, because it takes a little bit of time, right? Like, I have a full-time job. I have a wife that I love spending time with. I have a family. I have an airplane that I love to fly. It's to share this with folks that otherwise don't get to know Bruce, don't get to know all these other aviators that I have the privilege of sitting and listening to these stories. And as a little kid, I still spend a lot of time around the airport, but as a little kid, I spent a lot of time around the airport with folks like you, and getting to hear these stories. I've read them in books and thought, it's on paper. Sure, someone else got to live that story, but to know someone that actually has, to hear the words from their mouth, it's very humbling. I'll be honest. I have done nothing that incredible, nothing that rewarding, I think. And so to be able to capture it and share it, that's the goal, that's the mission. I hope you enjoy it. I appreciate you listening. I hope other people enjoy it as well. But it is a privilege, truly, because not everyone gets to hear this stuff. So I hope that more folks get to it. More folks get to realize just what an incredible career aviation is. What a wonderful way to spend time with your family. I don't know. I've like you talked about, being very thankful. Yeah. I'm very, very thankful. So I want to share it with others.
Yeah, I think aviation has got for the people just getting aviation now, I mean, there'll be technological changes. We'll see electric airplanes and all these things, more unmanned airplanes, electric VTOL taxis to take you to the airport. So aviation's got an exciting time ahead of it. And if you're young now, you haven't missed the best of aviation. All you've missed is the first 120 years. But there's much more to come.
Absolutely. That was a great way to end it, Bruce. Thank you again so very much.